All right, I would like to call the Concord Carlisle School Committee to order.
We don't have a Concord agenda, but I'll call the Concord School Committee to order anyway.
Right, and for the minutes, I think Erin is probably on with us. Sharon Witt is not present. She's away and traveling someplace fabulous. And Aisha is not present either. All right, so we will start with public comment. If you have a public comment, please step up to the microphone over here in the chair. And as a reminder, this is a meeting in the public, not with the public, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you so much.
Keep it short. I
Absolutely.
apologize for.
Oh, stop.
Name and address.
We're all doing our best, Lois.
I applaud the decision last week by the select board to increase the budget for the middle school project by 7 million to 110 million. While it was less than the 115 million that was requested by the building committee, it still represents a healthy increase to the budget. The select board is trying to balance the needs of the school with all residents of Concord. To somehow suggest that the students in Concord are somehow being shortchanged by this decision defies credibility. A building with $110 million construction value will serve the students of Concord well for many years to come. Importantly, what is lost is that the select board set the budget to a level that would generate a favorable outcome at special town meeting. If it was set too high, the risk of failure increases. My concern with the project is that the bids for the building project are going to come in well above the new budget of $110 million. There is ample precedent for this. Recent bids for the Somerset, Westwood, and Swampscott building projects all have been well in excess of the budget value approved at their respective town meetings. The building committee needs to undertake further VE today and build a cushion that will allow it to absorb higher bids and start construction in May per their schedule. Should they ignore what every school project in Massachusetts is experiencing and the bids come in well above the 110 million budget, they will face costly delays and higher redesign fees from the architect and OPM. These costs could easily reach $5 million and force them to even take greater VE to pay for these costs. The time to take VE is today, not in April. At the select board meeting last week to vote on the warrant article, the school committee was criticized for its silence and lack of leadership over the building project. This is your project, and you need to exert more authority over how it is being managed. I respectfully request that the school committee have the building committee answer the following questions after it consults with the architect and OPM. What is the likelihood that the bids will be above the construction budget? And what will be the total cost should this occur? To me, this outcome is inevitable, and the building committee needs to take these issues and tackle these issues immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the minutes, Louis Salemi and sorry,
68 Great Meadows Road.
68 Great Meadows Road. Thank you. All right, I don't see anyone else in the audience. If you are on Zoom, if you could use the raise hand feature, if you would like to make a public comment. And there are no hands, so we are moving on. We are on to our budget workshop, which is very exciting. We have Bob Conry is going to do our budget workshop tonight. I think everyone should have the slides in front of them. Tracy Novick from MASC was supposed to, MASC, I should say, was supposed to be joining us, and she is ill and unable to attend, but she will be joining us at another point.
So I've added some slides since we last talked, there's a couple to just address things that Tracy probably would have talked about, but not.
Okay.
Yes, have.
Yep.
So I've added a couple slides.
I need you to have that right in front of you.
Closer.
Okay.
Thank you.
So anyways, I'll run through. This is intended to be the presentation that gives information to all members. I know some of the members have been on longer than others, but I did want to kind of have a baseline of information that would be helpful to all of the team and in the committee. And as we go through too, it's intended to be, if something doesn't make sense as we go through it, it's intended to be somewhat interactive where, ask a question if you need clarifying information. And this is supposed to be about 1 hour, I was told. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Yep.
And so hopefully we have time. I've created an exercise, I think, that will illustrate some of the challenges that we face in building a budget, and something that I would ask that the school committee kind of break out into some groups do. We do that at the end if time permits.
Okay.
Erin is driving the slides. I'm going to ask her to advance us. So the school committee role in the budget process is really governed by law in Massachusetts, and it's also in our policies. It's, the school committees are responsible for the review, approval and adoption of the district's budget. And it's clearly stated in law. It's clearly stated in policies. This part of the presentation, I think that Dorothy and Tracy wanted to go into detail. There's a lot more that goes into this than just the policy about the role in the process. I'm not going to speak to that as much. I think that's better coming from Tracy and from Dorothy. But I will, just as a reference, say that there's some slides, there's some policies that you can look at to get more information. Erin, can you jump to the next slide? The first policy is policy DB, and there's a subset of policies, DBR, DBC, DBF. You can see at the bottom there. So the policies that you'll adopt an annual operating budget in accordance with law. And it's not just a number, it's a financial expression of the programs that we're running. And I think this is well said. It mirrors the opportunities and challenges that confront the school system. I think a lot of times we look at it as it's X percent, it's a number. All that goes with that, the programs that we have, staff that are supporting students, student needs. This is the financial expression of what we're doing. That's something as we present and share with you, we try to reflect that in what we present. So when we go forward this year in the budget process, we'll try to do it in a way that reflects what's going on in the district, not just it's up X, it's down X. Erin, next slide, please. So the budget goals, from an administration perspective, we want to maximize the effective use of our financial and human capital resources to impact every student in a possible way, while within the law and ethically. We want to use our expertise to support students instructionally and social emotionally that supports our mission. And I've copied our mission there just to, it's helpful to see that as we think about and go through the budget process. As I am 4 months in, I don't have that memorized. It's helpful for me to see that and think about that as I go through the process. Yeah. So next slide, please. So when you get into the funding of a school budget, there's different funding sources, and you may recall seeing these in the FinCom presentation. There's general fund revenues, and we'll go into each of these in more detail. Revolving fund accounts, grants, circuit breaker, which is a specific, I call it a quasi-revolving fund established by the state, and then capital project funding. Next slide, please. So within the general fund, I'm going to talk about this broadly, and at certain points, I'll talk about the differences between a municipal budget and a regional budget. So within the first general fund source of revenue is state aid. Chapter 70 funding is the core state aid to public schools. And as it's fairly complicated. I could spend 3 days just on chapter 70. I'm not going to go too much into it here, other than to say it's a funding model. What it intends to do is to figure out how much we should be funding schools and how much towns should be contributing to that, and how much the state should be contributing to that. And it's progressive. And by progressive, what I mean is, and what the state means and intends, is that it factors in towns' ability to pay. It factors in two factors. One is the town's wealth, which is a factor of the commercial, the residential and commercial tax base of properties, and it factors in income levels. And it looks at those two and it weights it and it says, based on what we think the school needs to fund and based on its relative wealth, we think it should pay somewhere between 25 and 75% of the budget. Concord here, we pay 75% of our budget. We're a minimum aid district. Springfield and Worcester get 75% funding from the state. So that's the nature of the progressive funding model. Again, there's more complexities to it. It's not that simple, but the gist is that it's progressive. There's other factors in it. It has funding for certain things. There's additional funding for special education students, for low income, for English language learners that factor in how much funding you can receive per student. So for Concord Carlisle and Concord, this is not a huge funding source, but it's certainly helpful and not insignificant. How you see this in the budget? You don't see this in the municipal budget at all. In either Concord or Carlisle. This is a town revenue item. It certainly affects taxpayers. It's just not something that rolls through the school budget. So you're not going to see this in our Concord Public Schools budget. I will tell you on a personal, not really personal, but in my last district, we did talk about Chapter 70 funding with one of the towns and say, okay, we're seeing a large increase this year. This is part of the Student Opportunity Act. Might be an opportunity, there might be an opportunity to fund some things that we want to fund. So there certainly can be conversations with the town about it, but it's not in the school budget. It goes directly to the town for a municipal budget. It's different in the regional budget. In the regional budget, you'll see it as a part of our budget, as a revenue source. That's an offset to our expenditures. And typically, up until 2 years ago, these have been fairly stable, slow growing amounts. The Student Opportunity Act that was enacted by the state has raised the levels of funding that are available to school districts. It's hard to predict how it will affect a district on an individual district by district basis, but I'm hopeful that there may be some additional funding sources. This is a 7-year Student Opportunity Act funding. Somewhere as time passes that we might see our levels increase. So that's Chapter 70, again, the main state aid program. If you are interested in some light reading, I have a link there, and you can do your own 3-day class.
And Bob, if anyone has questions in the middle, do you want them to hold their questions or just kind of be interactive? I should have asked that.
I'd say at the end of the slide.
Okay.
Yeah, it
Great.
would be helpful just
Can I
to
ask a question,
finish the
Bob?
topic. Yeah, sure.
So when Chapter 70 aid goes to our town budget,
Mhm.
is there any way that then it benefits like CPS? Like, does it come back to us? So they just get it, receive it and redistribute it essentially?
Well, with the
And then like, how do we see what that amount
the
is?
CPS piece. Well,
Yeah.
I can
Okay.
see it. We can all see it. It's public.
Okay,
The net effect is they're reducing what the taxpayers are paying.
right.
fund our
I just
budget?
didn't but do we ever visualize it anywhere?
Yeah, you'll see in the town manager's budget
Okay.
for the town.
Okay.
So we work
But
with
we
her.
don't visualize it as a line item in our budget.
No,
Nor do we look at what Concord Municipal spends on our behalf either. They pick up a lot of insurance, am I correct?
that's correct. That's
So
correct.
there's money flowing
yeah.
both ways. let's
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Correct. Is there anything else on Chapter
no.
70?
But you use the chapter, the anticipated, when making the budget and making the ask to the towns.
I do that with the region.
Just the region, not,
Yeah,
in
not,
the,
not, I mean, I'll be transparent. If we had a 50% increase, I'd be talking to the town and saying we're looking for more money. 50% is extreme. I'm using an extreme example intentionally. But it's something we certainly should, as responsible school leaders, look at and talk to the town about.
But the state doesn't put any information out until January. So we're always building before any inkling of what they're gonna do is available, so we have to be conservative.
No, I mean, I know, I don't look at the Concord budget, so I didn't know how you, but
Yeah.
because I know in the regional, we always have, when we forecast the assessments, we kind of guess at.
It's exactly what
right,
it is.
At what it is.
Yeah.
I didn't know if the same thing was happening.
Yeah, so the
in-
town's doing the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And it's an educated guess at the region,
Mhm.
like we know what the prior year is. It's not a shot in the dark. So, but the
there-
timing impacts our accuracy.
Is there more uncertainty with the, like with the Concord versus the regional or?
The uncertainty
It's-
with Concord doesn't impact
Okay.
us. Like if it's different, the town will adjust.
Okay.
In the region, the rules are so you can't overspend your budget. If you have a revenue shortfall, you have to make it up in your expenses. So you have to be careful and not be too aggressive.
Okay. I see, okay.
Can we go to the next slide, Erin? So another form of state aid, again, this one is specific to regional school districts, is for regional transportation aid. I don't have the year there, but a long time ago, it was established to incentivize districts to regionalize with the commitment to fully fund, which I've underlined intentionally, transportation costs of regional school districts. Over time, that reimbursement rates decline, not achieving that goal. And I would kind of go further, and I'll say my editorial comment would be, so it was intended to fully fund. It only funds students who are more than 1.5 miles from the school. And in addition, it only funds, so those are the eligible, so if you have 80% of your riders are within 1.5 miles, they'll cover 80% of your costs, but then they'll only reimburse a portion of those costs. So you could be spending $1 million, 80% is reimbursed 800,000, and they're going to pay 75%. It gets down to 500,000. So, if you regionalize 20, 30 years ago, thinking you're going to get the full $1 million, you're getting about a little bit more than half of that now. It's certainly I've seen things through, I forget the name of the committee. There's a regional group, not MASC, a statewide regional group that does
Mars, I think.
does advocacy, and I've received their emails and I've seen them advocating the state for more funding there. And this is a possibility that I know is particularly impacting rural districts, so we might get the benefit of their lobbying for more funding here. There's also a charter reimbursement, which is very minimal here. We don't have many students opting for charter schools, but there's revenues that you can receive for that. They're fairly small. We can kind of disregard that here. Next slide, please, Erin. I don't, think we have a lot of this here. I mean, again, a district that's so I'll just describe it here. It's for students it's for services that are being performed ordinarily, or that might be eligible for funding through a non-educational agency, that if they're performed in an educational setting, you can receive Medicaid reimbursement. And here, it's not that significant a revenue. It's nothing either, but it is something that we have as a funding source. In some parts like Western Mass, this could be a much bigger number. We also have investment interest income, which is just what it says, what it sounds like. Interest rates are very low. There's restrictions on how you can invest municipal funds and what we can do. So, we're getting low amounts there. That's not going to be driving our budget. If interest rates come up, that might increase. And we have other sources of other district revenue. One-time things, we have parking fees. These are smaller items as well. But again, revenue sources for the regional district. I'm trying to think of an example of one-time revenue as well. An example would be, we're going to talk about the buses later and surplusing them. And the proceeds that we get from that in the regional district would be miscellaneous income. That would be an example. So excess and deficiency is its own category. And so I've, on the next slide, I'll go through that. If we can advance, Erin. So I don't know how familiar everybody with, is with this, but what it represents is the cumulative surplus or deficit of the operating fund balances carried over from prior years. I refer to it always as our equivalent of free cash. There's the specific legislation that authorizes us to carry excess deficiency. There's a formal annual review process that we go through that we're preparing our documents now that will certify. We'll have the Department of Revenue review and it needs to get approved before we can use it in the budget. And we can decide how much to use. We're not, limited. I think that what we need to do is, kind of be prudent and not over leveraging it to subsidize kind of structural deficits, but use it in a way that is sustainable. And I think the way that's being used now is sustainable. We have a healthy balance in the account. And we're allowed to build it to up to 5% of our annual budget. That's both operating and capital is calculated as, and we're at, I believe it's 4.7 or 4.8% as of our last certification and our estimate for this upcoming year. Trying to think if there's anything else. And there's a little bit more complexity to the E&D process. We create a balance sheet. There's temporary offsets you can have, but in a nutshell, this is kind of the key points that I think are important to be aware of.
This is region only, correct?
Yes.
So
thank you.
options for Concord would be perhaps prepay or return to general fund. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And there is a slide I want to talk to you about at the end in my notes about, so this is also a safety buffer. The way we all operate in our lives, and I think in most places we want to have a safety buffer. I personally don't feel like we necessarily have one in the municipal district. I think this serves as one here in the regional district. So we'll talk later on about the municipal, but this is only for Concord Carlisle. And again, I think we're in a good place. It's been managed and navigated to where it is. And it's nice to see. And we'll try to continue to do that as we move forward.
The operating and capital says whatever we're spending on debts or all that gets factored in.
Yes. Yep. I went and had to ask that in my last district because we're getting close to the 5%. And I found out I had a little bit more room than I thought. Yeah. Yeah.
Fine, finish off some debt service and change this.
Yep. Yeah. So is there any more questions on E&D?
But just for newer members and just to confirm for me, we would look at budget time at E&D and allocate some of that.
Yes. Yep. In fact,
So it's
Can I
not
get
just it's not just a reserve. It's a reserve that we actually will use in part.
that's correct. That's correct. And
Lori, I'm sorry. do you
Yeah,
have
I was just
something
gonna add some detail to that. At one point in my tenure, we were up as high as $600,000 out of E&D to subsidize the regular operating budget. That's way out of bands of where you want to be because we're not filling it that fast and we were draining it faster when filling it. So the goal is still zero, but we have settled very comfortably at 300,000, I think, and stabilized that for the last couple of years. I think the goal is still to diminish that. We haven't, not for any reasons other than sound fiscal management. There wasn't a driving need to, and we were going to be over the 5% if you didn't keep pulling the 300,000 out. So it'll be something I'm sure Bob continues to look at, but it was a note that for sure Moody's, when it was, E&D was at 2.9% 5 years ago. So the fact we're up at 4.9 is, or 4.8, whatever the number exactly is really intentional. Moody's definitely named it as a concern for them and put us on a watch list because we didn't have significant subsidy available. That circuit breaker was at 0.2. I'll have to add. So the regional budget's gone from fairly concerning and needing a lot of time and attention to a nice, stable place.
I will just add, this isn't a district I worked in, but another person I worked with, that what they evolved to was using E&D for smoothing out bumpiness that you didn't want to build in the operating budget. So if you're in a district that had a K-5 math program being put in for a large sum of money, and you didn't necessarily want to have it in the budget, you might use E&D to fund these kind of bumpy things that cause your operating budget to go up and down. But no, we're using it. We're not planning to do anything different in this year's budget process, but there's different ways to use it. And we're pretty well funded OPEB wise too. In other districts, that was kind of something they looked at as well. Why don't you strategically use it to fund OPEB specifically? But again, we're in a good place and we want to try to keep it there. And then if we do go over 5%, we're required to use the amount above 5% to offset. We're required to use that in our budget. So we don't have any say in it. We're required to do it. We can advance to the next slide. So revolving funds. So these are funds that it's not the general fund. These are things that are set up for specific programs. They have revenues and they have expenditures, and they're typically funded from fees. And we'll go through some examples. There's some that are self-funded or mostly self-funded. We have the community community programs, adult education. Their fees are paying for the programs that they offer to the community. Food service, which is funded partly by fees, but really at this point, it's paid by the state. And it still serves as a revolving fund. Normally it's a mix of state and federal funding and fees. Well, we still do get fees through adult meals. We get a la carte items. So I'd say it's a mix. The intent of our food service program is for it to be self-funding. So all the staff and all the food we buy and everything that comes out of food service is hopefully self-funding. And to the extent it's not, we either have to draw down on the balance or pay for it out of the general fund. We have other revolving funds, athletics. So athletics, preschool, facilities rental. Preschools, obviously, CPS, I didn't note that in the slide, but in athletics is the high school. We do have some athletics as well, smaller at the middle school. It's important to note in the last three, these are not significant, I would say, revenue generators relative to the cost of these programs. These are to help offset the cost of the program. It puts some of the cost on the participation in users instead of having the budget absorb all of it. But again, the budget absorbs the bulk of those costs. For food service, that's in both districts. Community programs is that's in CPS.
That's region.
I know it's in the high school. Okay.
Mostly region, because
Yeah.
that's where you got 71E that enabled it way back when.
Okay. So if there's no questions on this, we'll keep moving.
Quick one on facilities.
Mhm.
Not a leading question, don't know the answer. When we rent at CPS, do we recoup our costs and does the rest go to the town?
We have a revolving account that it comes to.
Okay.
You
So-
see,
Oh, that's right. we
Yeah.
fixed
Yeah.
that with the
Yeah.
town. Forgive me.
Yeah.
So it used to go to the town.
Correct.
And the town now allows us to
Yeah.
hold that back. So that operates like the region.
Court your mic.
Forgive me, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to,
Wait, you say that again? I kind of missed it.
so
I didn't
if-
realize how it was.
so if you
before.
do,
That's good
if you
to-
do nothing in a city or town
Yeah,
and you rent a public school, you can recoup your costs and any balance reverts back to the town.
yeah.
We asked the town to be able to hold those monies and the town supported that idea. So now at CPS, like the region, where we didn't have to ask permission.
Right.
We can rent, cover our costs, and should there be a positive balance, we have a marginal gain.
Correct.
We're not Holiday Inn, we're not in the
Right.
business of
Right.
renting,
No?
but we don't have this disincentive to support the
Correct.
community's interests
Got it.
with these kinds of rentals.
That's
That's kind of
right.
the way
And
it
that's a good
works.
point. I do think that, there's times when we want to have custodial staff there. And so are we paying for it and not getting the rental income? Like you basically kind of,
No, the
cutting
users
into-
pay for
yeah.
that.
so.
Thank you.
It's, I would say to the point, you potentially can generate some small surplus there. And it's nice to have a balance there in case you have a building problem at some point down the road. Particularly if we're talking about municipal, we talked about E&D before as a safety net, what are our safety nets at CPS? If we have unanticipated problems. And so, that's potentially, it's not much money there now, but if there was 30,000 and we had a septic issue, sewer, but
Keep knocking.
Or a daily event at the middle schools.
Know that. Okay, that's
I had a
good.
septic issue in my last district, so.
Oh, I've done septic
Yeah.
at Sanborn, more than I care to talk about,
so-
more than you care for me to talk about.
So we try to budget for it in the operating, we try to budget for what we need in the operating budget, but so that's a revolving fund again. So we have balances that we can carry over. We typically zero out the preschool. The athletics, we do carry a balance. We'll see where facilities rental goes. But these are what the funds are, and there might be some small ones that aren't even worth talking about, like a lost book fund that's got like $7 in it. I'm making up the number, but small amounts too. But these are the more significant funds that we have. We can go to the next slide. So this is a significant source of funding to both of our districts, particularly the IDA, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. For special education, it's to be used specifically for special ed. We've decided to use it all for tuition costs. So I think it's kind of self-explanatory in terms of what's that's for. Title I, we use for kind of support for reading, math tutors, those types of supports. Title IIA is for professional development is its purpose. Title I is a little bit more geared towards, I think, academics and students at risk, I guess broadly. Title IV is, where I've used it for is community engagement. I'm not sure yet if we use it different here. That's not as much funding with Title IV. Bless you. So these are all sources of funding we can apply for and get, and there's so far, there's not risk of getting rejected unless we just, don't apply. There's specific rules on how they can be used that we need to comply with. They're issued through DESI, even though they're federal government's the funding source. So we need to comply with those terms. I think I'll leave it at that. There's some details too that we, I will actually say this because it's come up questions like, can we use this for staff? If you do use it, like for IDA, if we were to use it for special education staff, there's kind of a tax that the state puts on where you have to pay a retirement contribution, the MTRS contribution, even though it's already paid for by staff. It's just kind of an artificial tax. So you'll see us try to avoid using teaching staff in these positions typically to the extent that we can. There might be times when we have to do it, but so there's a disincentive to charge staff to this. It doesn't apply to non-MTRS positions like tutors. So just a little detail on that.
Maybe this one goes to you, Lori. Is that also something that would bring the cliff problem our way?
Sure, and
Yeah, I
I
think
suspect
it's-
that might be part of the disincentive.
Yeah, okay.
They don't want you counting on that for staffing.
The idea that we would fund with non-traditional budget a new position and then be left quote unquote holding the bag later.
Yeah, and those are probably some of the most stable grants we have is IDEA because it's an entitlement grant.
You
and
could pull it off.
You could
Yeah.
probably, and a lot of districts have no choice but to use it for staff, but any district that has an option doesn't because of the inflationary piece they've put to it with
Yeah,
MTRS.
Thank you.
but that would just, to your point, it would create a cliff if they pulled the IDA funding from us, like whether we used it for staff or not, we need that funding and I mean, they know that districts need, that's not going to go away. Metco funding is a large source, significant funding as well that we receive from the state, and this is in both districts. So we go through that and work through and allocate those funds specifically for Metco students. And it is healthy funding, but not the per pupil funding we, allocate overall or spend. It's not paying for all of the costs of students attending. We have competitive grants as well, and these are ones that we can apply for either through the state. Example I use there is the EPA Clean School Bus Grant. It's competitive. We lost, we didn't get it. We certainly was worth applying for. We're going to apply again in the next round, but that's what a competitive grant is. There's in some cases, there are criteria that gives favorability to districts in a certain status. In other cases, it might just be the merits of the presentation. I know that early literacy is a grant that's been offered through DESI. I've seen curriculum materials for math, a recent one a couple of years ago. So that, we have to kind of monitor and see what's out there and see if they fit with the things that we're doing.
So we're still waiting to hear on the diversity hiring and retention grant that we submitted. Andrew's also working, they just posted a hate crime prevention grant to correlate with the new law. So he's working on that one now. So we're always watching and deciding what grants you have to be willing to put in the time you're willing to waste. So
Yes.
trying to balance that, but.
There was a time when the district had a full-time grants person. So now Lori has to manage.
Yeah, generally
many
whoever
people doing
runs
this.
the program that it's going to support tackles the grant and asks for help.
Does the school committee have any formal role vis-a-vis grants? I mean, typically we are informed of grant seeking and grant acceptance, but do we have a technical role in it? I don't think I don't know. I don't know.
We can review that. I used to present once a year what grants we were applying for and what the amounts were. The hard part is you don't know what they're all at different times. So
Sure, yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's awkward to be coming to a meeting with one grant here, one grant here.
And we wouldn't want to hamstring the
Yeah.
application process either. So it's a fine line, I
Yeah.
imagine, unless the law dictates what we're
Right.
supposed to do.
I do think it's worth researching. I think there might be a compliance piece of approving the final dollar amount as if it were a gift or accepting the revenue. So we'll research that and
Okay.
get to you. I've actually never been in a district that did it. But I think it is possibly out there as a thing we could do and be a little tighter.
Yeah, and so I adopted it in my last district in my last year as a best practice. I'm not certain whether it's a requirement or not. I can research
a
that
look at
and
it,
check
yeah.
in.
Yeah, and we talked about doing an update. I know Sarah and I had a little back and forth about ESSER funds and kind of where we're at with that. And
Yeah.
just to update, in your next variance report on that.
Sure, yeah. I think for grants, those are, I don't know if there's any questions about grants. Those are again, a healthy source of funding for us.
I would just repeat what I heard at the conference on Friday. The reminder that a grant is a contract, meaning it's never a gift. It's.
right.
Oh, I assure you that the demands of the government right now on us for these grants, Title I just took Kristen. She'd be cringing if she was here to hear it. 6, 7, 8 months for them to finally allow us through, because the federal government overlays requirements too, and they're attaching more data and more outcomes, and the demands are very high, and DESI's in full compliance mode again after COVID. So we're being monitored very closely on all of those.
Yes.
It is a lot of work.
Okay, can we move to the next slide, please, Erin? So circuit breaker is another important funding source. So in the name implies kind of what it does is it basically provides kind of relief from more costs than you've kind of excess costs related to students typically moving out of district. I've tried to kind of the timing on this one can be confusing even to finance professionals. So I'm going to talk about it. When I do this, I think about 3 years at a time. So we're going to receive money this year in FY23. It's based on expenses from last year that we can claim. And we're typically going to spend the money that we get this year next year. So so what we're going to spend next year is going to be based on what happened in FY22, if we can manage it, the way that we want to manage it.
Why is that?
Why is that? Well, so
I've seen that multiple times throughout the last 6 months. Why do you do, why is that?
So one, because you're allowed to carry over a full year. If you're allowed to, I would say, and you want to have a savings, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I would kind of flip it the other way. The second reason is from a budgeting standpoint. I know right now what next year's revenue projection will be. So when I budget, I have the 22 claim. I can factor that into next year's budget in FY24. And then revenue I receive in 24, I don't know exactly what I'm going to get. So it's good to have that safety net and say if there's FY24 revenues up or down, I can react to that and put it in the following year's budget. But another piece of it is I would just say it's about, we talked about not having that safety net in the municipal district. That serves as a safety net. If we send 2 students out of district that we didn't budget, I'll use the example in my last district. If you send two twins to New England Center for Children at $330,000 each plus transportation, that's $700,000. You use up all of your circuit breaker just for 2 students. So I'm fiscally.
And weren't you saying, sorry, weren't you saying that those prices are going up this year anyway?
14%.
Yeah.
Well, we've written a letter asking if there, and a lot of districts are just highlighting that.
Yeah, there's some advocacy going on with the legislators to ask them to engage on this and either if they can't change that, then look at their funding and
Yeah,
offer more this year. So,
that's a huge increase.
yeah.
Yeah, unprecedented for them too. That I looked at a 10-year trend that was posting on a listserv and it was, 2-ish range, 2% a year.
And you said it goes back down to that. They're expecting it to go back down to 2%. Year after.
We're not expecting it to stay up. They
After you
didn't.
set the base.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's.
Yeah. We'll be content with 2 if you, yeah. So yeah, I think there's reasons to do it for budgeting ease and accuracy and being able to see what your revenue is. I also think it's just smart practice to have a safety net, because if you're in a position where you're having to cover 700,000, you're either going to have to go to town meeting for more money, which is embarrassing. Not that that's
Plenty of places end up having to do it, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
But also if you can't get that, there's no guarantees it's going to pass. Then so are we going to be in a position where we're having to react and find places to pull out of our regular budget and destabilize what's going on organizationally? So I am a strong advocate for carrying over
Yeah.
the maximum we're permitted to.
And that's been a primary goal of ours. I've referenced already the regional budget we had dropped to 0. The same has happened at CPS in my very early tenure. And very quickly, the goal was to not to use all those up. So we had no carryover because it's really your only stability fund. So we've been successful at that. Sometimes 100% and carry over the whole year. We dipped into CPS a little bit this year because of some of the upfront costs and unexpected placements.
We can certainly hope and try, but we can't control, like, if these expenses happen, that's what it's there for. So.
Right.
when you do end up in a position where you have to dip into it, then, I mean, I guess you hope that at least that's early in the budget planning for next year, because like, yeah, never, yeah.
Yeah, it's always part of the cash flow process that the business office is working through. Whoever's in that seat makes the plan for like, we're gonna dip into it some, and now we know we're not carrying over as much. So it has to get factored into the
Right.
subsequent year.
Yeah.
But it depends on what we claim for the current year, because it really is always a 3-year moving set of pieces. So you might dip into it, but you might recuperate some because the claim for the year you're closing actually helps buff it back up again. So it's a lot of cash flow. Yeah.
It's a lot of management. Yeah.
I forget on this one, is there a sunset on it?
Circuit breaker, a year, right?
You can carry over a year. I think it technically is worded as, I don't know, you know what, why don't we, it's simple, keep it simple. It's a year you can carry over.
Okay.
And you're not allowed to accumulate.
So one more argument for the simple way we're doing it.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
Watch it.
Yeah, you can't
We can
stockpile it all.
Watch it get created, watch it get received, watch it get reallocated.
Right.
Correct,
And,
correct.
uh,
It's sort of a cap without a flat cap. It's based on your take
okay.
on how much you can.
We'd be wise to keep it that simple.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, to the extent we can, and we would try. There's a little bit more about it, just so you understand how they calculate it. So it's, if a student, is, the expenses related to educating a student and meeting their needs are over 4 times the state per pupil cost. The reimbursement, circuit breaker reimbursement starts after that 4 times amount. So, I'm going to be approximate about, say, 60,000. I don't have the number memorized, but say it's about 60,000. And if we have a student at $200,000 placement, we're getting reimbursed. The $140,000 is the eligible claim. We get up to 75% of that reimbursed. So they're not paying for the full cost of the out of district placement. They're paying for the portion that's above 4 times the state per pupil cost. And then of that amount, they're only paying up to 75% of that. Now, so you might have read in the news that the state has had a surplus. So that 75 is probably likely this year. There's been other years where that number's been a lot lower than 75. So,
What's the window? Like, what's the range?
there's no legal minimum. I mean, I don't think they would ever go to 0, but like,
I 2009-10, it dropped to 49%.
That's what I
It
think.
was devastating
yeah,
A lot of money.
and fairly unexpected. They were down revenue, but so were all the municipalities. So it all just, thank goodness, the recovery money came out in that recession because it salvaged it, but it was bad.
And that one is not a progressive, like that's every school
Correct.
gets the same percentage.
same
It's-
rules
it
apply.
Doesn't matter what your student population is, what your house value is, it's everybody it's, okay.
There is some knowledge and expertise in the staff that does this in the special education area that help you obtain money. And so, there's a process where you can get private schools that are not technically on their approved list. You can get them approved, and not every district does that. I think that we have staff that does that, and it's impressive. It's not something I had seen before. And so we're fortunate to have the people we do in the special ed department.
Debbie Dixon. Can I just highlight where every district's excited that they're starting to phase in some reimbursement for transportation? Because you've seen some of these numbers. We're up at the $750,000 mark even for us. So eventually is 100%, right?
Eventually, I forgot how many years this one's being phased in.
Yeah, I
I think
forget
it's like
too.
5 years.
Yeah.
I think we're in year 2. So, we claim this transportation costs, and they put in a factor and count a portion of it, not all of it. I think it might be 40% this year. And then it'll be 60%, 80%, 100%. So that gets added to the tuition cost.
So
Which
does that fall into then the 75% of eligible expenses, or is that a different,
it's
like if it's added to tuition?
you think of it this way: you build the cost of the student first, and you build the tuition cost and the transportation cost, and figure out what that is. subtract that from 4 times
Mhm.
the average.
your
So
delta.
it goes into that same number.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
75% of
Yeah,
the total.
yeah.
And it's funded from the state budget, which is important to note because we're in a healthy place there, but if we're not, then when I'm presenting the budget, I might say, well, 75% is not a good idea. So we, I will say the Department of Elementary Secondary Ed tries to give us guidance, but they can only say so much. The legislator has a say in that as well. So circuit breaker, that hopefully kind of gives you a sense of how it works.
Thank you.
Can we advance to the next slide, please? So I think that you've probably all seen these. I just wanted to keep fairly high level here. I'm not going to go into the weeds, but really just a reminder at the top, the bulk of our budget is staffing expenses and expenses related to staffing. There are other expenses here, and these are, everything in there is important. But the bulk of the budget is staffing. We can go to the next slide. So I thought this would be helpful just because I don't think when you think of a school budget, you automatically think of all the staff. And I might have left somebody out. If I did, let me know. It was not intentional. It was this slide was something I intended to borrow from somebody else, and I started creating it. So if I've omitted anybody, I apologize. But we have administration. This is just within a building. And so all these positions, hopefully you see, and they make sense. We have the front office, the building principal, assistant principal, building service workers, the maintenance staff. There's instructional staff. It's not just classroom teachers. We have resources in special education teachers. There's specialist classes as well. All things that hopefully sound familiar too, that you're students are taking. Some students need additional support beyond their core classroom, and we have reading specialists, ELA specialists to support them, as well as tutors. So there's a lot of support provided to students, important supports. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Before I worked in education, I didn't think of this at all. And so the resources we have available to our students are a lot different now than we did, 20, 30 years ago. We can advance to the next slide, please. These are for you to look at in your leisure. I'm going to just keep it very high level. You're going to see these slides as we present throughout the year, the 1,000 level view. These categories are the DESI categories. So administrative cost is 1,000, instructional 2,000. Think of the name of the category that it describes the expenses. And if you have a question about an expense and try to think about which of those it fits into, you're probably going to be right. Administrative is self-explanatory. Instructional are all the teaching and learning. And other school services is the ancillary functions for the most part. Well, it includes nursing, but food service, transportation, athletics, not necessarily core academics. Maintenance, the fixed charges is insurance and benefits, retirement. And the tuitions is the last one, and the bulk of the tuitions is out of district. So when we present our data throughout the year on the quarterly reporting, you'll see these categories. So it's I just wanted you to have what was in those categories. Can you advance to the next slide, please?
If I might.
Yeah.
It's gonna come up
Sure.
again until we sort it out. I think over the last couple of months, we've talked about cost centers and transfers. And I don't think we've made any formal decision at this table. I'm assuming that pending any formal decision, cost centers would at least be this 1,000 level. That if we need to transfer across 1,000 level, that probably would be good practice, a rhetorical question, a leading question here. Would it be good practice to have school committee authorized transfers when it reaches that level?
That's what I did in my last district. It's like I know that I have a colleague who worked in another regional district that spent 3 hours in a meeting going through line item by line item, and I would advise against that for all of our sanity.
You
I
don't
don't
hear us out.
Well, do you know what was really interesting? So going back to the MASC conference, I don't remember what session it was in, but Tracy Novick was presenting with her equivalent of Bob. I don't remember the gentleman's name. And so John, and so their Worcester school budget is $500 million
Right.
for perspective. And they asked
Tracy's
around,
business, yeah.
they asked around the group of us, there was a lot, it was a packed session. How many line items do you think are in their budget? And someone raised their hand, 6,000, whatever, 30. So, and he was, and it was just, that floored me. And again, it was, and then Tracy
30.
went into, you know, we all need
Not
to be
30
treading
lots.
water at the cost center level. And it was just something I hadn't thought of, you know, anyway. So I think it goes back to sort of that idea. Again, it just shocked me. Everyone's saying 6,000,
Yeah.
2,000, 30.
Yeah. Cost
And I just looked at my notes to confirm it was actually 30.
Well,
So,
but you
yeah.
got- Yeah, you're doing like, you'd be approving every time one teacher needs to have another pack of Crayolas or something.
right.
Like, okay, let's call a school committee
Yeah.
meeting.
It was
If we
interesting.
do something like, I would, terminology cost center means something different to me, and to like it, to me, it's, so let's just be careful when we get to that. Like
Yeah.
the copy center is a cost center. We accumulate costs there and charge it out to people. So I think we're talking about like kind of budget categories.
Correct,
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
So I
that's
would,
what they mean.
I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
we should come up with a different
Right.
term. But yeah, I would advocate for at that level that we just saw. That's what I did in my last district, and I can certainly share a line item detail. if People wanted to see it, but I wouldn't recommend actually approving or looking at it. This,
Yeah, I think the confusion is that like MASC always refers to them as cost centers.
yeah, well,
Yeah,
I think they
e-
should. but
Even in
that's-
their, yeah,
I don't-
like on their
yeah.
thing when they talk about quarterly reports.
So
I'll
we
hold-
don't have profit centers.
Yeah.
No.
I'll share my pain with Tracy.
That's
Um,
perfect, actually.
So I just thought it was important for you to know what we do before we even present to you. So we have a process. It's very inclusive. It's very involved. Lori and I don't build the budget. We review it. We certainly work on certain parts of it, but we're involved. We engage with the principals, the administrators. Early on, department heads are involved in building, academic area budgets of supplies, materials, software. They evaluate their needs. They do a very thorough and detailed job of looking at it. We have inordinate amount of detail supporting what they're asking for. And yeah, I just wanted you to be aware of, what they do. And so we review that. It's zero based is important. I think everybody's heard that, but in many districts, you have $1,000 budget and you just go ahead and add 3%. You go on year over year, and waste gets built into the budget and resources don't get used efficiently. In our zero-based budgets, we've seen departments at the high school, and this applies to elementary schools too. We've seen departments make cuts without us asking them to.
She's loving that part.
Yeah.
Oh, this is $3,000 less.
And it's helped pay for other areas where there's increases. So I think it's taken seriously, which is refreshing to see that approach, that understanding from staff and the department heads. They take this seriously. So
And when did you start that? Because you're in the throes of this right now.
yeah, the red is where we are
2.5
right
hours
now.
today at the high school we did. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where we are right now. It's
Okay.
in process. We're meeting. There's some, minor cuts. We've also find things that, okay, this is actually in two places. It's not much of that, but so through this, there are some adjustments made or decisions made to budget something somewhere else than where they have it. So what we have next on our, we do have a couple more meetings. What we have next is to roll up and see what our overall percent increase is. You know, we have an idea, but we'll talk about that when we know for sure. And we'll present it later. So we'll factor in kind of. I don't want to speak politically here. I'm just going to say there's a lot to be considered in where we go from what we see in our number. And we need to factor in information we receive from the town. We need to also feel like we're moving forward with something that advocates and supports the students we have. And that's our first pass budget in December, and then the open hearing right after that. This is earlier than most districts. But that's our first stake in the ground, December 2022. And it happens really fast. I can attest to.
Yeah, this is the earliest that any of us is here, I feel like. Last year was January.
We had a little wiggle room last year because the Concord
and then
one
the year
closed a
before.
little later, and then we did 2 years of COVID, which means we just built budgets over and over again, and yeah. Yeah, so we're back on a more typical timeline,
Typical Concord.
typical
Yeah.
Concord timeline. It is an anomaly, and I've started this early, but I also had a town meeting in March. So this is the start early and then still do a later spring town meeting, and it does mean you're doing a lot now in the fall that gets more informed as time goes on, so.
So this is kind of how we build it. And the next slide, please, Erin. I might have mirrored things. This is, I already know what our key drivers of change are before anybody says anything about what's going on in the budget. These are the same things all the time that drive the budget. That's not to say that anything else is not important. It is, but the things that drive change are staffing, special education costs, and technology. These drive change. So changes in staffing, retirement affects that. We have lanes, we have steps, we have cost of living. If there's retirements, and there's a lot more in one year, a lot less in another year, that can cause the paying, the staffing overall expenditure increase to be something that's harder to predict or a little, I guess, bumpy. Finance people don't like bumpy in the budget to the extent we can avoid controlling it. So that's a kind of a bumpy item. Special education, the same thing. To some extent, that's offset by circuit breaker, but because of timing issues, that can be bumpy, and also just because student needs can change. And then in curriculum area and technology as well, multi-year renewals of programs. They're happening 1 year and not in the other 2 years, so that can create bumps in the budget. So when you think of variability in the budget, these are things that I typically focus on and know that I need to be able to explain if we're up or down in a given year. And then this year we have another element of bumpiness, was inflation that kind of is going to go across all of our items, and we'll see what we can do to kind of manage through all this. And again, you'll be seeing us in December with the first set of numbers, and these are likely going to be the key drivers of change. Next slide, please. So we talked about the top left square is kind of what we already talked about, how we build our budgets. On the right-hand side, we have the town process, a guidelines process. So, that's something we have to look at and consider as we move to the open hearing. There's a balance there between advocating for what we need and for considering fiscal constraints, and wish that was easy, but that's our job, and that's what we need to kind of factor in. We go through after our initial presentation, a feedback loop with the school committee, town officials. There's potential reviews and revisions. You can see there, after we do our initial presentation, that's when we find out about state aid. We also might have changes in expense and services that we didn't know about when we initially presented our budget. You know, and that will happen. We might get communication on healthcare, what those increases will be. And so we'll review and revise as needed. And I kind of, that can be iterative, that can be multiple times, and hopefully it's not as many, but that's kind of the high level process. Next slide, please. These are just some additional things I wanted to highlight. For regional budgets, they require approval of 2/3 member towns. We're a 2-member district, so 2/3 means both. Won't pass if just one town passes the budget. We have something called an alternative assessment method, which is very simple and much less complicated than the statutory method. We just look at the enrollment across the 2 towns, the relative share, and that's how we divide the budget. I just highlighted the timing issue that you saw in the previous slide as well. It would be nice to know these numbers earlier, but the timing is what it is. So I just wanted to point it out. Next slide, please, Erin. I also think I've always looked at this. I just find it's always helpful to look and have some context when we're looking at where we are spending wise as a district. And so these are the schools we benchmark with for athletics. And I've added, I think, Carlisle in just because we're Concord Carlisle. So it's those 12 districts, and I've added the state totals there. So you can see I've had, where Concord is and where Concord Carlisle is. They're out of this, set of groups, where 5th and 6th. I don't know if that's surprising or not surprising. I was just curious, and I think it's helpful to have that information. One of the things that I don't necessarily present here, but we like to have time to look at periodically, is, within this, there's breakdowns of how much are we spending on different categories. And, so I looked, for example, at supplies and materials. We don't spend as much as I thought we did. There's tremendous resources here for instructional materials, but when I compared it to kind of state averages, it didn't really jump out. It was like median, kind of at best. Looking at kind of contextual data, I think, is important when we look at our budgets. So anyways, that's what this is. Erin, can we move to the next slide? And then the enrollment we'll always look at, just to understand what the trends are, and by grade levels. Yeah.
The per pupil, that's strictly that's operating, that's not capital, right? Like that's not, doesn't factor in, does it factor in debt?
I
and stuff
don't think
like
it
that?
factors in debt. No,
Okay.
I don't think it does. I'm almost positive it doesn't.
Okay.
I'll check, but I don't think so. Yeah, that would throw off
Skew it,
comparisons.
yeah.
Yeah.
Would be apples to apples.
So, but it should include everything else, and it's not just the general fund. It's all includes revolving, any source of funding.
Okay.
Okay, we can move to the next slide. So I will just add, I had a couple additional things I put in at the end. I'll share the slide deck, or I will get it to you. There's a glossary of terms that I created with the school committee chair in my last district, because they had new members that turnover, and they wanted new members to have a glossary. So it's written a little bit more in her terminology, but that's not really a disclaimer. It's written well. So, but it was kind of written as a way from a school committee member's perspective. And then I put something in about a special ed reserve fund, which I won't go through now. I just thought it would be something interesting for you to look at and think about, and maybe at some point down the line we revisit. We talked about having a safety net, and particularly for CPS, where we don't have the E&D. It could serve as, and we don't have the maximum circuit breaker carryover. You can set up a fund that's it's like a stabilization fund for special ed, and it can just sit there. And then I guess say that the nice thing about it for school and for town is once it's funded, it sits there, it enables a little bit more comfort with, having a little bit of a safety net against budget uncertainty. It's a little bit easier to go into the budget and do a zero-based budget and know that if something comes up that you weren't expecting, that there is some type of safety net. So, but there's rules about that.
But it's a one vote at town meeting. Am I
To
correct?
establish it. I
Yeah.
think we have had parts of this conversation over time and always got stuck on the who's putting money in it
Mhm.
question, rather than just talking on the establishment of the account itself.
And so to that point, I was talking to Lori, I told Lori, in my last district, we had that same exact conversation and we moved forward the year later with still that issue. And we had the fund approved and we just didn't put any money in it. And then 2 years later, we had an opportunity to put money in it because Maya gave a 1 month premium on healthcare. I don't know if we had that here.
Sure, yeah, okay.
And so we said, well, let's take that 1 month premium and fund the special ed reserve fund.
Because it was a windfall that now got put visibly, responsibly into
Right.
Yeah,
that
And-
account that had been waiting for something
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
and neither town had to pay for it.
yeah.
So, so at some point we might revisit that. We'll get through this year first and go through the process. I don't know if we have time. I don't know if there's any questions. Well, I don't think I think I'm gonna pause here and just see if there's any more questions.
I think we do have that glossary already from the email that you sent. It's
Mhm.
weird because
Um,
you can't see it within the context of the email, but when it's minimized, you can see it. I have no
Oh,
idea.
interesting.
We
Okay.
did get a
So
link.
we have,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we have that. So,
Is there any problems with any other links that I sent? Because
no, I don't think so.
okay, I had a problem with them myself, but I was told that they didn't, others didn't, so.
No.
Okay. So I don't know, it's, I created, well, actually, I'll pause there. Is there any questions?
Bob, you've only known me for a few months, but you know I have questions.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you. I can't go through budget reviews often enough. I think school finance is something that we don't do every day of the week, so we need to be quite good at it. And it's budget season, so thank you for putting this
Happy to do
together.
it.
I personally would like more visibility on our revolving funds. We learned before you were here that we had aggregated a number of funds into our student activities funds, and that was going to require some attention. And so I'd appreciate the forbearance of the chairs, an update on that at some point, where we stand with
Okay.
that revolving fund, or is it being disaggregated, or are you comfortable with the way it's being
Okay,
managed?
what did you say?
Not tonight, but
Yeah, I know you're talking about student activities specifically, or because that's not really a revolving fund.
well, that's the way it was characterized to us.
Okay, yeah, it's,
okay.
but it's not money that we really control. It's the students, it's the student active, whatever those clubs are for. It's really for,
Right, but it's right, we don't control it, but we manage the inflow and the outflow.
yes, we're the
So
agents of it. Yeah.
we de facto are responsible for the legitimate use of it, but not that I'm
Yes.
suggesting there isn't, but
Yeah.
I think it deserves a little bit of school committee visibility on occasion. Turning to a subject that I'd love to avoid, utilities. Even though we have our own light plant, I imagine that you're not sleeping very well when you imagine the jump in utility costs this year. Is this something that you're already trying to get ahead of, and are we going to be in really dire straits, or do you think we've got enough room? Should there not be any other similar peaks or unexpected spikes?
We're looking at it, we're aware. I don't necessarily want to forecast yet. I have an idea, but I'd rather not say it. That's okay at this point. I think that.
As long as you share my worry, that's fine with
Yeah,
me.
yeah, no,
Okay.
we're paying attention to it.
Yeah.
I do know that.
Code for us having not talked about it
Yeah.
yet. What that is.
Well, I would also share that there's some uncertainty too. Brian Folds himself has some, concerns. It's had this municipal light about, what's going on in Ukraine and how that affects
Sure.
pricing. So,
Yeah,
but we'll stay connected to him and get the guidance that he's able to give us, and we'll factor that in. it's, you know,
Good,
I
okay.
certainly have an expectation that it's not going to be a 0% increase, so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just think there's going to
yeah.
be pressures on this current fiscal year that we couldn't have anticipated last January.
Right.
Yeah, and to some extent, we're used to some ebb and flows, you know, gas, fuel went through the roof and we had to manage that with the buses last
Mhm.
spring, so. You know, we hope there's some fluidity there that we can make it work, but we have to be talking about it for sure.
Can I pause for 1 second?
Please.
Just go back. I can tell you now, my recommendation would be to defer the student activity. I think that is something that fits well doing at the end of the year, just to show, here's all of our accounts. I feel like that's not necessarily a budget item.
I'm
And that's what I did in my
I'm
last
yeah,
district.
if I have your assurance,
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that, for
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
thank
agree.
you.
Yeah, like a May or June meeting.
Mhm. Right.
I got a specific question about gift expenses, but I think I can do that through the chairs offline. Two other items. One, I'm imagining, Lori, that we're already thinking about a discussion in the future about retirement incentive, yes or no, for this year.
I
So
wasn't going to propose it.
yeah, no, not,
So,
I'm not trying to
so yes, it can certainly be
get a
part of our
preview.
discussion.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
that is a financial factor for us. But we're in strange employment times, strange economic times. So I'm certainly not advocating it this year, but I know we'll be thinking about it. Finally, in our variance reports, if I'm correct, we have the encumbrance column, but we don't have a projection column. And at MASC, they were adamant and explicit that they would recommend a projections column, that the two are not the same. So clear on it that I revisited and said, say it again. And the recommendation was rather clear. An encumbrance is not a projection. There are two different things. And a school committee would be well served to see that, because the assumption is you're creating those projections every time something changes.
Yeah, I can certainly understand the point. I don't think it's a simple undertaking. I think that we would need some time to digest it and think about how we do it. And I think there's a certain amount, I would be transparent now. I mean, we can project what we know. There's going to be some placeholders. I can't tell you what we're going to need to repair that's not broken yet, knock on wood. And I know for a fact that, when I talk to other districts that do projections, they project and then the projections change. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
a budget is a live document.
Yeah.
Every bit of it. We understand that.
What I do try to do, I will say as a thing, I do try to encumber as much as possible so that, I think that we can encumber more than we do right now.
Which is why I challenged them on it. I
Yeah.
thought, can we be satisfied with encumbrance? So anyway, maybe we have a conversation with Tracy because
I'd love to talk to
Yeah.
Tracy.
she was.
yeah,
I mean, that's where I think this would be great, because we went to a similar workshop and it was, again, Tracy and John that they were together.
Yeah.
They were a great team that really worked together. And what they were saying is through your variance reports or through your quarterly reporting, that you're always gonna know where you're at. And utilities was one thing they used as an example. So, in your first quarter, you look, okay, you know what, we're gonna need some more money here. It's a little less, it's a little over.
Yeah,
And so you should, through the whole year, be hearing and know exactly where you're at in the budget. So they talked very high level on it. And I won't use the word cost center, I'll use category. But they said, in terms of those 30 categories, those are the categories that you're looking at quarterly. And the two of them together agreed that as the business officer, they always use SBO versus assistant superintendent, where the lingo is,
Yeah.
that, you should be hearing throughout the year. And you really have a good idea of where you're at in the budget, because the budget is a live document process
yeah,
and constantly changing.
yeah.
I want to understand you more
Mhm.
clearly.
Mhm.
We would still see 100 level, would we not?
So what they're suggesting is you just look at those 30 categories.
Theirs were
For
30.
Theirs were
projections.
30, for example. Ours might be
Yeah,
just,
we have about 10.
right, we have 10. And that's the level as a school committee we should be looking at. That was in, and that was in a, what workshop was that? It was the first one we went to. It was the, I don't know if it was called budget and budgeting, or it was,
I don't
but it
remember what
wasn't
the
what-
title
Well, Your,
was.
your predecessor would give us 1,110. 10 was pretty darn granular, as I recall.
Yeah.
I would be very hesitant to say we back all the way up to 1,000 only. I don't think I'd feel very responsible if that was all I saw.
We could still share that in the quarter in terms of what we project. I mean, honestly, if you ask me to project, I have to look at the detail to build it up.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not making I'm not insisting on it here. I'm
Yeah.
saying this was, considered fundamental and explicit on their part, to the point where I challenged it and said, wait, won't encumbrances give a school committee what they need? And the answer was no.
Yeah. Well,
But that doesn't mean that we have not performed our duties thus far without it. But it was news that I thought I should bring to this table.
but we can look at that.
yeah, we can look at that. And I think this would be like great to continue the discussion on, when Tracy is able to join us, and hopefully that will be before the end of the year. That's our goal, is to kind of get her in here, but it depends on obviously
Timing.
her
Certainly.
wellness.
Those were mine. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No?
Sorry.
Do you have an exercise for us?
I did. I forgot, I wasn't really thinking that you're on camera, so I don't know how great this is or whether you even want to do it, but I thought I also didn't know how long the presentation was going to take. So I'm going to hand this out to give you an idea. I did not want to use a realistic example of our own district. I didn't think it was appropriate. So and I did this in previous district, but I have an exercise where if we have time and you want to do it, if we don't have time, we can do it some other time, or we can skip it, but
This is a workshop. I would love to do it.
okay.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna hand these out. And thought that maybe you could take one. Yeah. And ask that. I just wanted to give you a flavor. And I'm not gonna read them, but basically what I've
This is
done
like
is,
our life. It's like
Yeah.
just get a feel for our, not only in
Day-to-day?
the budget bill, but in the day-to-day of like how we have to juggle it.
and it's the part that's realistic is, I'm kind of interested to see if you can decide, but we.
Thought it was all very realistic.
Yeah.
The situation we picked is a Western Mass rural district with significant low income population. We have unexpectedly, the town has come back to us and said we have $125,000 available that
That
we can
part's
add
not
to our budget. Okay. And then we have different options here, and I've kind of represented what different people have advocated for, and but this is not unusual at all. These requests might not be specific to our district, but there are some.
Are you
that
sure?
might be
The
some-
boiler problem?
I didn't know, I didn't know about that one till, but that one's in there because I had to close school in my last district. Because we
Oh, this
didn't
is
have enough PM.
terrible. Looking at
So if you wanted to, you could talk in a group of two and kind of rank how you would spend the 125.
This is awful. I don't like this at all.
Okay, this isn't fun.
Is there a gradient?
I gotta get
ruler?
my calculator out for a little bit of this. I gotta see what the real.
Should we just like do where we're sitting?
Yeah,
Go next to,
Yeah.
just
You sit.
feel free to walk around and help us through our process.
Yeah.
Okay, see what we do
All right.
to get you the budget.
Right, so I.
70, all right. Okay.
So again, I'm thinking student
already
achievement, students first, right?
I haven't picked your superintendent yet. I need to be in groups either. So you're gonna have to.
50, okay.
Strictly gut. No, there's a little while.
I'm crossing out one right away.
I'm not crossing out that one.
School closures occurred though.
I think it's easy,
In what number? Number
Two.
two? Yeah.
just messing with it.
That would,
I
To
mean,
avoid it. Couple occasions. Oh,
I think I'm taking out 3.
Yeah.
Because they have.
My
a
kid does,
curriculum,
if I did that, I'd put
This is
myself
better.
in
it took many years.
And it's
Mhm.
student achievement, but it's not like they don't have one.
Mhm.
We never tried to spend my time.
there. What do you want to try? Looking at 2 and 3.
Okay.
I'm gonna say cover one of those.
What?
I'm gonna say cover one of those.
This is going back. What's small?
This one's 30.
Well, yeah, and you can see.
Mm.
So it's 37.5. Jeez, so we're talking.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, number 4.
All right, Sarah.
I'm gonna split one. Depending on how it's on.
That was, yes, okay,
Okay,
yeah,
so
that's
split.
okay, yeah.
Okay,
I like
so
that.
It's gonna be 37.
Yeah.
25.
Because I think we have.
So we don't. So you're gonna
Say when I'm ready.
Additional costs and charges, 75,000.
No.
Are you ready? Oh, I'm not ready. Are you ready?
For this.
I'm a Concord School Committee primarily, so
I
I
think
can't
we
say
have
that
to,
this covers.
we can't have schools.
But I wouldn't do it.
You can't assume.
I'm looking at, I'm looking at 2 and 3, because that's not bad for 3
No.
years.
Preventative maintenance.
I mean, these are in a row.
Something.
I work with this.
This isn't us, but this is us, this is our district.
Okay.
No, are we supposed to look at this in terms of our district or just this scenario?
You're in Western Mass.
I'm in
Oh.
Western Mass.
Yeah,
That's
so
why
you're
you
gonna
need
get
that.
low income
You need
population.
that. Get a low income population.
And I would say try to. I really
Penny.
important. You know,
I'd give it half.
Yeah, that's, I
time.
left that one, I checked these
Again,
2
but
off.
that's 35.
The number
Half
1
time,
was
not full time.
like number 3 for me,
Agreed.
Do you agree with that?
because it's
Yeah.
service.
I can do
Okay.
that.
It's-
Okay, so we still
Yeah,
have.
no, I I'm think- wheeling and
What's the
dealing
class? It's like
like
school ball.
pretty much.
Okay.
Maybe do
Okay.
that, right?
Yeah.
August.
So that's it. That's,
August
oh no,
is
we
the
haven't.
latest.
written that.
August thing.
So we've spent 75.
Wait.
We've done halftime, requests 6,
35
Right.
plus
Yeah, I got my.
75.
7, 5. All right.
So a
75.
couple days have passed and your budget meeting is tomorrow now, so we gotta be prepared.
Yeah, stop.
35, sorry.
You only get the bubble for a while, and you have to decide.
Got it, sorry, I didn't-
So, okay, so now we're at,
I think we're all gonna be on the same wave.
Okay,
so I need 52,000.
Wait, actually,
Have one travel.
I have to make sure my math
I
works.
think we do.
For one of these, I think you need one of these.
One of what?
25
Happening.
of the health insurance.
So in
Yeah.
3 minutes, I'll ask each team if
No.
they're comfortable sharing what their team selection is.
So-
We need consensus. and
Yeah.
3 minutes.
Now you gotta work on consensus. Yes.
Okay.
What, a little 25?
25.
Let's go for 3
All right, go ahead,
years.
Sarah, what's your, where's your head? You don't have to be.
And then
exact.
make.
Like
you know,
seven.
just put that in.
Keys, the right-
We're 97.5 with
the
the 25, right?
preventive maintenance.
Is that right?
Key,
Yeah.
especially when.
Okay.
Yep.
I think.
And that's
it
just
should be cut to
maintaining.
half, And then you could do the 10,000.
Want me to go?
Yeah, I don't just I think I want the 10,000 per year. Everyone has to have service.
Okay, so let's add the 10. Let's do this.
And I want
But
some
then-
finding. Yeah.
Well, that's what I work.
Then the next year.
That's that cliff bullshit.
No, it's not the. privilege. It's just
Then we're-
27.
And why not?
Oh, renewal of an existing program. Oh, so we have to allocate the 10 anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna follow on yours.
Right.
Because.
So now we're
You're one of two, yeah.
107.
I'll tell you what, number one.
We'll give them.
significant
You know,
Yeah.
That's not.
So what do we have?
Yeah.
And if you compare hers, that's-
125.
And it's
can't
free,
be
and
in
it's free
school.
resources, yeah.
can't be in school,
uh,
We can't.
17.
afford this.
Yeah.
And then there's another piece about number 2.
Yeah, we're working it through.
If indeed, I
I
just.
hate
Much that-
I just gonna smile.
Let's check my math.
This is what I do all day. My team.
Save what children do, so we have-
Lori,
Check my math.
I, yeah, I am.
One of the things put us over.
If they agree with me, yeah.
Okay, I, like I said, I think.
Yeah, we have, oh, we got our
ready to
plan.
have to fix
I said 15. I said a part, half of this.
A part-time.
We say no to.
Part-time social worker.
What do we
And
say
then
now?
investing in tutors, I was saying 8 to 75.
I know, yeah.
One half-time person, and that's the math. But I can see
Rankings.
why. Brendan is
Going down.
Oh, and they'll pull out every.
Yeah.
It's one.
And then we're yelling at the school superintendent because of our bad choices.
Like the tutor would help with math.
Well,
would
it's
help
lower
with the
than the existing
middle school
cost.
math,
Yeah, that's the way we hope.
the middle.
We save some. money.
I like this.
Actually, a really good.
This is.
There's a
things
we asked for, like,
That are
at every given moment.
Yeah. This is
Yeah.
completely
It gets
railroad.
fixed. August, social worker gets hot spots.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you've got $10,000.
It's people, it's kids, it's benefits, it's maintenance, it's everything.
I know.
That's
I'm too much of an empath.
Do you, I don't- college, like,
All right, guys. I'm gonna call something on this.
All right, we're doing it, guys.
You ready?
Yes.
Everyone ready?
Everyone ready to present their
So I-
plan?
I'm gonna remind everybody that we're on camera.
Yes.
Um,
Thank you.
and Lori and I promise not to grill you too much.
Yes.
But.
Or you.
So this, I don't know if there's a group that wants to start, but just, walk through what you arrived at and what you thought about. Any volunteers? There's no,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily right.
You
answer.
guys never. Yeah, go. Looks like Superintendent Wilson's ready.
You want me to?
We have consensus.
We pulled out significant supporting rationale. One, significant low income population. Two, that this would be a base budget change, which means next year looks this much better so that these resources don't go away. So if we can't do everything we want this year, we've got a new base for next year to work with, which is kind of comforting. That led us to number one, because if students can access more learning more of the time with some social support, that might be a good investment, although we might have to renegotiate the 70 in order to also accommodate request number two for preventive maintenance, because if we can't get buildings open, we can't have school. The hope there is that a healthy infusion of preventive maintenance would be a one-time that would buy a few years. And we wouldn't be back next year with the same request, which then means we'd squeeze out something for tutors number 6, because of all our disciplines, reading is probably the most foundational one to access all the subject arees.
Thank you. So, but you have overspent your budget.
No.
Find a point.
Tutors or whatever.
We're gonna get what we can with the remainder.
We're gonna
Yes.
get some tutors.
Oh, yeah, we reduced FTEs in here too.
Oh, yeah.
Big time.
Big time.
Oh, but thank you for sharing your thoughts. That was helpful to hear.
Who wants to-
Superintendent Morano next.
Oh, sure.
These two
Okay.
love turning the tables on.
Yes. I will start next. So we looked at everything. We agreed that they should have a social worker because the population of Western Mass, it seems as though they would need that, but we had a half-time social worker in there for 35,000. Maintenance, we think is extremely important, but unfortunately, we only have 17.5 to spend on maintenance because we kind of worked around, we kind of thought about students first. So we went to 17.5 for maintenance. We went with the $10,000 option annually for math, and we'll just keep renewing that because we don't have the 70,000 to give to that. We're going to budget for 25,000 in the health insurance because maybe you'll probably have at least one. You might not have 3, but you'll have at least one. Request number 5, unfortunately, this one really hurt me more than most because I do think smaller class sizes are very important. But we don't have the money to have a full-time teacher, but we'll probably promise that to that school for the following year. And then the request number 6 would be a half-time reading tutor at the middle school and
we didn't give one to the middle and high school, but one
Split.
full tutor to split between buildings. And that brought us to our 125
Thank you. So there's an element of compromise,
compromise.
not saying no to anything in there a little, but.
Well, we did say no to the, to poor Principal
cut,
Smith, and
yeah,
I did
yeah.
feel really bad
Yeah.
about saying
Yes.
no,
Poor principals.
So,
but
Poor
I'll
Principal
guarantee it to
Smith.
Principal Smith for the next year.
well, thank you.
Ours is pretty much the same as yours. So it's a negotiation on, I mean, any good superintendent's gonna go back and say, and I'm not gonna. It's all about the kids, and we can't spend that much money on a preventive maintenance program, right? Even though it does keep the schools open, so you need to give us a better number. That's just not gonna be acceptable.
Was that part of the rules?
You can say that, the vendor can say, well, then we're not gonna do it.
Then you go
That's
find
the
another
reality.
vendor.
Yeah, no, I know. And we do have preventive, this is not our district. We have a fantastic facilities director who has preventive maintenance programs.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Keep the doors open.
These are
No, it's
examples
Yes.
of, but this actually did happen in my last district. So, we
yeah.
kind of built up the PM program and it wasn't 50,000, but we did have regular maintenance that we had to add every year. And there are districts with
Oh, yeah.
just reacting
I've
in their maintenance
worked in one
budget,
for
so.
14 years,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Trying to piece it all together.
so hopefully that was helpful. I created this, just, I did the same thing in a previous district with the administrative team and got feedback that it was helpful. Again, these are fictitious examples. I just kind of wanted to give you a flavor for it. I also thought you are at these meetings listening all the time. It might be fun to do something. So hopefully it was.
That was fun. Thank you.
Okay.
It was.
You didn't have quite the same personal urgent plea that goes with each of these as they come in lobby. It's very-
didn't meet these people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
I did,
Oh, yeah.
I did give Principal Smith your email address.
I did feel really bad about that.
And they don't take no and
No,
not come back.
no.
Just like they're supposed to.
So thank you. And, if there's any questions as a follow-up, we can connect later and we'll be at future meetings as well. But so hopefully that was helpful. And if there's more information, it might be helpful to do this every year. It would be helpful to put in this and we can adapt and adjust the presentation. But I think there's certain core things that people should see each year, particularly when there's new members. So, but also would welcome feedback too.
I think it was really helpful
Yeah.
because I do think,
Really good.
all of us go to
Thank you.
MASC training, you get very high level, but this I think is helpful to get it in our own district. And then if we have questions on things, we know where to find you.
Yes, you do. Yes,
But
you
the glossary is actually helpful also. And I think we had something similar. We had a glossary here.
Yeah,
last year
in all the
too.
budget books we've.
Yeah,
lost.
so that is definitely helpful for all of us. All right, so if no one else has any more questions, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and we're looking forward to you and Tracy coming together with us again. So that will be, as soon as we get that scheduled, we'll let you know. All right, so on to our reading of the minutes. The minutes were sent, Erin sent those around this week. Anyone have any changes? I don't think anyone had any changes, so someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from October 11th? Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And did you say aye? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
She said thank you.
Thank
Oh,
you,
thank you.
Erin.
And I was like, no, I thought you said here and I was like, wait, did I miss something? I didn't hear it, sorry. On to correspondence. Okay, do you want to do CPS first? Do you
Sure,
have
we,
that?
I'm just looking, we actually had no correspondence directly to us
Yes.
outside of poor Louis Lemmy, who last week apologized for exceeding his 3 minutes. We've been CC'd on a lot of correspondence, but none that was actually directly to us.
And then at the region, we did receive correspondence from the Metco Collective, from another person on some DEIB research with a link for us. That was at both.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
it,
it's
both.
kind of at both. And then you all should have received the correspondence from the League of Women Voters. And that's all we had at the region. And then on to our discussion portion. So first up, we have the advertising on the CCHS campus, and this is our first discussion. We did not get to this at our last meeting. And this has to do with advertising, and just to bring everybody back, we had a couple, I think, emails over the summer about advertising on the CCHS campus. So we looked into everything that was happening, and at the time, all of the temporary signage was removed as per our policies. And I think it was probably just an oversight, given the time of the year that everything was happening. You know, one was for the pickleball tournament in the spring, and I think that, you know, parent groups organize things and probably just forget to take the signs down. So Aaron Jungus was, you know, took it all down for us, which we appreciate, and hopefully he won't have to do it next time. And just maybe reminders will go out to parent groups that put up temporary signage to take them down immediately when the event is over. Another example is Kicks for Cancer. All that signage actually came down right away.
They're
And
good.
Mighty Moose, that seemed to just be, you know, churning along the way it should go in terms of temporary signage. So what it brings to us is the more permanent signage, which is the baseball scoreboard. So back in about 2015, there was an advertisement for Acton Toyota on the baseball scoreboard. It ran out, I would say the sponsorship ran out in about 2020 or 2021. So it was replaced with the Route 2 Athletics sign underneath the scoreboard. It was a renewal. It was for a renewal of what had been approved previously to that. And it was for the amount of $4,500. And it's to be up for 5 years. I think it expires in 2025. So the signage is actually up and attached to the baseball scoreboard. And it is for us to discuss, to approve. And we really just wanted to go back and do this in the right way, because it never came to us for the change in signage. But I'm not sure that the boosters group really even knew to come to the school committee, because it had already been an advertisement that was on there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and our policy is sort of vague, like I don't know that every time an advertiser changes, they need, we're not approving the company, if you will. I think we're approving that there is an advertisement on it. So, I want to give the benefit of the doubt to these guys that they felt that this had been approved. They didn't come back when the advertiser changed. And another piece of our policy that I think is relevant is that it's incumbent upon us to know what the dollar amount collected by the fees, if you will, like for the advertiser. And in this case, with respect to the baseball program, it does fund their assistant coach. So I think that's part of what's relevant to the discussion.
And that was that whole signage thing prompted a review of whatever policy had been there right? Like,
It
Back in
hasn't
the-
gone to policy to review it, but
It is on the agenda.
no, I'm saying when that
Yes.
scoreboard was first put in, or the first advertisement was put on,
Yes.
that prompted some conversation at the school committee level about, let's look at our policy.
Mhm.
Let's tighten this up to get the updates on the
Right.
funds and stuff
Right.
like that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That was sort of the genesis of
Yep.
our existing policy as it is now. Yes.
Yes. So I open it up to discussion about the signage, because we are hoping to vote next week. So we talk about it this week, and then next week we would vote
The
to
next
approve at our next meeting to approve the signage.
And this is specific not to the policy, but to this one.
This
request
It's one
for-
request.
Yeah.
So this is the baseball scoreboard.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Court. Go ahead.
so correct me if I'm wrong. I'm really not sure of the facts here. We'd be accepting a donation of 4,500.
Where,
You mentioned 4,500.
it-
Tell me about
sorry.
$4,500.
Yeah.
2025
Mhm.
advertiser coach. Those are the essential ingredients, right?
Yes.
Can you give it to me again, how that all works?
I will give to the best of my knowledge how I understand it works, and I will ask Dr. Hunter to provide any additional detail. So in 2021, there was a renewal of the advertising sponsor, so that just the physical plate underneath the baseball scoreboard changed from Acton Toyota to Route 2 Athletics. And by the baseball boosters, I will call them.
Fine,
I don't know
okay.
what they're called. I don't know.
Boosters came
Basic
in, changed the
boosters
sign.
came in,
Okay.
changed the sign, found another sponsor, asked the sponsor for $4,500 to fund an assistant coach. As most of our boosters work at the high school, they do fund for assistant coaches, correct?
That is my understanding.
So it's like the friends of, you name the sport, friends of lacrosse, friends of swim and dive, whatever their boosters organization is called. So that money got paid to the boosters to fund the coach. And now this is where the district comes in. I don't know who cuts those checks. I don't know if it's the boosters
Yeah,
organization.
I'm not actually
And
sure
so-
either. We'll have to research.
So
it
if we
and
could
be
research
sure.
that a little bit for next
Yeah.
week, but really our role right now is just, do we
Can we
approve,
have a
can we
sign?
have the sign attached to the scoreboard? And the advertising money from the signage is going to pay for an assistant baseball coach.
So I
So
think what
we-
we need,
Those are the facts I
understand
understand.
this is not, like,
Yeah.
this isn't related
Yeah.
to this. It stems from this vote and conversation, but it's just sort of something to think about. Like, how do we ensure? So we have a few people, we have the tennis people, we have the baseball people, we have a few people who have, like, let's call it private real estate on our property, right? Who can sell advertising, who have advertising space, right?
Mhm.
How do we ensure equity for other sports boosters, like, who don't have access to, they don't, that they don't have a scoreboard where they can sell a spot on,
Mhm.
right? Like cross country or, I don't know, volleyball or whatever, like, who don't have their own dedicated advertise, like, we don't have a mechanism for equalizing opportunity to take in advertising funds, right?
No, and I think that every sports team, I mean, and I could just speak on, I guess, my own experience, every sports team has a different mode for raising money. Like I know, like football fundraisers coming up this weekend and they do a fall cleanup. So they do that. Some places do car washes, some do, so they all have fundraising associated with it. And they're all different. And I don't know how that
well,
gets
and football
determined,
gets
and
a
I'm not sure.
program where they can sell advertising.
Advertising.
Yeah, we
Every-
talked, the last time I remember really talking equity across is when we looked at the athletic fees
Mhm.
4 years ago or so. It's so varied and
Yeah.
some sports are more expensive. Hockey, for example, is so much more expensive for the participant. And yet maybe not as easy to fundraise versus, it's almost impossible to equalize them. So I don't have a good, I don't have an
It's
answer
just,
to
yeah,
that.
I mean.
Yeah, no, it's a fair
it-
question to
you know,
pose.
Yeah.
It's like.
Well,
Not
I-
easy to solve.
For me,
Yeah.
the critical words you said were real estate. When somebody has physical property on public space with which they can generate a profit or funds that they get to
There's subsidy.
earmark.
They get a subsidy.
Could be an equity conversation, I guess.
except
I get
that like they also raise funds for the board itself,
Oh, yeah.
Like
yeah.
they
the
bought one,
scoreboard
right?
itself, the
Mhm.
same way that the football would raise funds for their program that's out there. I mean, so
Or
I
pay
do
for the
think-
uniform, like football paid for uniforms. They gave a
Freshman uniforms.
donation.
Yeah.
Because they had more kids interested in football. So instead of having to find that money within the district funds, they fundraised and gave us a donation.
So how do you guys go about approving the ad?
we're just saying, can there be an
Can
ad?
there
Yes
be
or
an
no?
ad on the
That's it.
scoreboard?
That's
So-
the question posed to us.
Domingos, maybe I can speak to that a little bit. I don't know, but you mentioned the policy perhaps being vague, and of course, always the devil was in the
Mhm.
details. And I think you and I had that conversation too about how policy gets tough because we realize tomorrow's implications could be much more murky than we're guessing today. I don't want anybody to misunderstand. I think we're in support of the Boosters Club that do so much to support students. They like all of us around this table,
Mhm.
I think, have that as our first commitment. In terms of the policy, one, I'm keen on seeing that we adhere to our policy. Back to equity, that's the first way to ensure some measure of equity, notwithstanding all the different ways that people have different resources to do different things for our team. But we have to, I think, depend on compliance with our own policy as the first requisite, the first requirement. Otherwise, we're playing loose with people, and that's not fair. When I look at the policy, if I'm correct, where it reads no permanent advertising of commercial products, services, logos, or names. So it's not just talking about advertising. We're not authorizing advertising. We're talking advertising of products, services, logos, or names. So the policy is quite specific about, to me, that says we know what's there. We're not just saying a wall on a school can be okay for advertising and then we turn our back on it. No, we pay attention to what are the products, what are the services, what are the logos, what are the names? Because I think it wouldn't take us long around this table to decide there's certain advertising that we would
Yeah.
not think
Yeah,
would be
right.
appropriate for
Right,
children.
for
Okay,
children, right.
all right. That's a given, I think. So,
Mhm.
so this really lands right on us to see that we are in compliance, notwithstanding the fact that we're going to have to perhaps approve in arrears what should have been approved properly at a prior time. And there's another critical piece to this when I study it that I think is really important, and that is we're not permitting it per se. What we're doing, according to the policy, is permitting specific exceptions. Meaning the default still is, this is public
Correct.
property, it's not Holiday Inn, we don't advertise because we're not in the business of selling our school walls to the highest bidder. We could, but we don't. But this policy says we can make exceptions. And I'm comfortable with that idea, that these are exceptions, and it doesn't say come one, come all.
Yeah.
And advertise. We'll give you a lot of kid eyes on your advertising. I don't think that's ever what Concord Carlisle wants to
And I
do.
think the request should come to us specifically that say advertising, that say the name, they say what logo there will be.
Well, that's what this policy to me says.
I know, but we
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
do that.
Well, that's exactly. And so shame on us. And, thank you for people who brought this to our attention, because, sometimes we do have to say, oops, sorry, and we have some amends to make to ourselves and others.
And they have to
And
come
move
to
on.
us before they raise the funds with that promise.
We got into that pickle recently, no pun intended. Yes, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think again, trying to assume good intentions. There was a school committee that did approve this. And so, I'm assuming in the minds of the Boosters Club, they were just changing, so they probably got lost in this nuance too, changing the advertiser, not the fact that there was or was not advertising.
Who set the price?
What?
Who set the price for the advertisement on the billboard?
That is not within our purview.
Yeah,
That would
yeah.
be the boosters.
I want to speak to that too, Domingos, because when we heard the
Oh, sorry, thank
when
you.
we heard the $4,500, that's not the cost of this
Right.
advertising. You and I have no idea what the cost of the advertising is. We just know that we are the recipients of $4,500 that we.
No,
get
that
to-
was the cost to the advertiser. We know that.
Okay.
Mhm.
forgive
Yeah,
me.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
no,
we
we
don't
know
do
that was what the
Yeah.
Receive the money.
company
Yes.
Okay.
paid for that.
Okay, forgive me.
Yeah,
That's
so yes, we
Yeah.
do know
Okay.
that.
So. Got it. Okay, so that's important to know. Okay.
Yeah,
mean, I-
because when you say 4,500, does that even cover the assistant coach?
I believe
Like,
it
what is the
does.
cost for the assistant coach?
For 4 years, 5 years?
Right,
No, no, no,
and is it 4,500 per year, or is it just 4,500 one-time fee?
I think it's a one-time, $4,500 one time. And and really, you're right, like over 5 years, that probably
That's
would
like-
not cover an assistant coach for
900
5
bucks.
years.
But it goes
right?
towards it.
It goes towards it.
And we have to be careful there because we don't want $900 to obligate us to spend
Right.
$4,500 unless we understand that we're carrying the major burden.
Well, my thing is then you can open that door to other advertisers who might want to pay a little more. to offset other costs versus $900. $900 might not even cover baseballs for the season. Just something, again, back to the budget, something that we can use to generate additional funds, especially for the specific programs. Because then you can add it to the scoreboard for the football team and
Right, and per our policy, everything comes to us and then we then have to approve the exception.
Yeah.
So our assumption is in 2015, the school committee approved a sign. And I think that the coaches, that expired. And then they just replaced it with another one. And it was in 2020, 2021. So imagine the time of year it was, we were deep in COVID. And, they're looking for funding sources to help offset the cost for basically for the kids or the amount of fundraising they have to do. Because the fundraising typically always covers the assistant coaches for all of our teams.
And I think the tricky thing with this is that, like, I think almost everybody at this table has either been a part of a booster or some other I think all of us have run some organization that does some fundraising in some way for the school. And when you're doing that, but you're not on the school committee and you don't live in the school and you don't live in the policy book all the time, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I know from my own experience that there are mechanisms and processes that I was not aware of, right?
Yes.
Of the need
When you're
to
that booster,
follow
you mean?
because you're
Yeah.
not living it, right?
Right.
So the challenge to us as a committee is to communicate out to the world, but I don't even know how. I don't know what the answer is. I feel that we're probably most likely going to find ourselves, or any iteration of the school committee in subsequent years is always going to be retroactively approving something like this. I don't, because I mean, I don't know if there's a way to do messaging just to say, hey,
The people
by
who
the
were
way,
in charge of it
they-
changed
yeah,
all the time.
all
the
yeah,
time.
they change all the
Yeah, 'cause
time,
it's-
and they're not, they're.
Oh, yeah, because
they're
it's
not
constant
volunteers,
messaging.
right?
to the
And
point.
people just
Right.
want,
Right.
just
Doing
trying
what
to
we-
get all of the,
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
Sarah,
energy to supporting our kids' endeavors, right? Like,
Yeah. exactly.
I'm not comfortable with that, and I'll tell you why. If we don't do a better job, actually, we harm them. Because they can get too far down the road. It's one thing for us to be embarrassed. It's another thing for them to be embarrassed.
The person who needs to communicate this is the athletic director.
So I think we can do a better job.
Yeah.
so there could be like a little piece of paper that goes to the, whatever, like a PDF that
Boosters,
goes to
yeah.
the boosters.
But to your
every
point, it
year
needs to
that
be
just say,
all the
"Hey,
time.
Hey,
'Cause people
here's some
change over."
reminders of some rules about like
Yeah.
fundraising, right? And
Yeah.
there can be information about that new catch-all
Yes.
fund that was created last year because of the pickleball thing. Remember that they created like a
Yeah.
501(c)(3) so
Yeah.
that everyone doesn't have to write. So like just these reminders that, because some people who may be running these things now don't know about what happened
Yeah.
last year, and
Yeah.
they're still off on their own,
Yeah.
like doing their non-501(c)(3) fundraising when they could be taking advantage of
Yeah.
the nonprofit thing entity, right?
Yeah.
So like there should maybe like there's a way to codify some of this information and just have it so it passes down so that then we don't end up in
Right.
this kind of situation, or like the pickleball situation, like, because these are not like, is nobody did anything wrong on their, like,
Right.
right? They all
Right.
did what they were doing
Should we-
for very good purposes. And so
We want to make it easy.
we
for
want to
them
make it
do
easy.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
And do we, I guess the only other question is when it does change from one to another, do they come back every time?
Yes.
If there's a
Yeah.
change?
Oh, yes,
Then
yes.
that's,
I think we need to
we need to
specify that. and I
specify that in the
also-
policy.
Yeah,
then.
because
Yeah.
the language it talks
it-
about the logo and
Yeah.
the whatever court read
Yeah,
back,
or
but
our
we could be more
exception-
explicit.
Logos or names.
It's
Yeah.
pretty explicit now. It's an exception about advertising of a product, service, logo, or name.
Right.
Well, what advertising is not a product, service, logo, or name? That pretty much.
And I would like to have the tennis sign come back for a specific approval for the duration, what was going to be on there. Because we did not vote for that.
If we're cleaning things up,
Yeah.
let's clean things up.
Well, I'm wondering, I don't even know if this is a possibility, but do we also, as we think about this policy, do we put in like in the event that like a retroactive piece in it so that there is a process that we
No.
would follow?
No,
No, because then you're saying,
Yeah.
let's be retroactive some more.
Yeah. in
No,
2001,
we have the authority to approve things, even if it's late in the game.
Mhm.
But I don't think we set the stage for it. That's kind of contrary to what you were just talking about, which is let's be proactive and prevent these.
Oh,
problems in the
100%. Yeah,
future.
absolutely. We want to be
Yeah.
proactive, but we
I
also
don't
have to be realistic that people are constantly changing over leadership in these volunteer organizations. Like, I'm just wondering if we need a process.
I couldn't support it. I
So
don't-
what would be the process? Because the process is gonna be
Yeah.
the same thing. It's gonna
Just
come back to the
come back to the
for
school
vote. and We're all
committee to
gonna
do it
say thank
reactive.
you to
Yeah.
all you
Yeah.
parents who
Yeah.
do everything that you do.
That's right.
and, like,
Yeah.
you know.
Next time, please just check this with us first.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope that next week we have the facts necessary just to clean up the little bit we don't know tonight.
Mhm.
That we can.
And what do you
uh,
perceive that to be?
Right.
What do you want the cleanup to be?
Well, Lori mentioned that she wanted to double check, what was it, Lori?
Yeah, we'll check on the booster money getting to us and how it's applied. It is
Yeah.
a portion of an assistant coach. It was used
Yeah.
for, it wasn't
Oh, yes,
ever enough to. fund
Never
the
enough
whole
to fund
thing.
it. Yeah.
I mean,
We'll check
usually
on
the booster
flow.
money to support assistant coaches doesn't come through,
Right,
Right.
I just don't want to say that and not.
Yeah.
but they don't fundraise on our property, you know, with the sign. So that's a difference. Yeah.
So if we have two that we need to retroactively approve, let's go ahead and do it with understanding the terms and conditions.
Sure. The only thing I worry about with the tennis scoreboard is we approved it 10 months ago if it's in production.
I didn't-
Scoreboard, not advertising.
No, there was nothing in the
never-
motion.
Never a reference to advertising, so why don't we do it? This is no embarrassment to them. This is just us doing our housekeeping.
No, I get it. I just don't know if there could be tremendous cost to them in the event. I just don't know where they are on their production
Production of it.
schedule, considering we approved it 11 months ago.
The
But
sign.
Isn't this what they need?
The
us to do?
sign,
It
it
says-
says
it says-
advertiser,
Yeah.
No.
sponsorship,
What
or
they need us.
Motion did not mention advertising, so I did not know, nor did I vote for advertising. I'm not saying I'm just derail it, but I want to be clear on the terms and conditions associated with the approval. We were not clear there.
sorry, say that again. Sorry, you said, were saying something, Sarah?
No, I think that the question was just like, who's the advertiser and how much is coming in? Because that one that hasn't been brought to us.
Yes, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Like when we saw the tennis people, they said that they were intending to do the
Fundraise,
remainder of their
yes.
fundraiser with another pickleball tournament, right? That was what was discussed in that meeting, that
I looked at the minutes. I think it was,
the
I don't
remainder-
remember.
Yeah, there wasn't talk at the time of but the point is, in order to
Yeah.
to be the same to them as we're being to the baseball people,
Yeah.
we just need to
Right,
know
and we need to
how
get
much
those
to do.
requisite facts. Got it.
Yeah.
Because
there-
it's,
Is there a
It's going
time
to-
frame
For the tennis scoreboard?
in
or
the policy?
No.
No.
No, technically it should happen before the signs are made.
No, I'm just saying it's, once the advertisement go up, is it a year? Is it 2 years?
That's not for us
That's
to
what it
determine.
is.
That would be for the booster groups to negotiate on their own. We wouldn't get into that granular detail.
But we would be told of it.
Yes,
because
We'd be
yes,
reported
yes.
on
Because
annually, yeah.
If it's a 2-year commitment, they're gonna tell us it's a 2-year
Right.
commitment. If it's a 20-year commitment.
Yeah, so
our
they'll tell
calculus is
us-
Gonna be a little different.
Yeah.
They'll tell us the term, like how many years, the cost, and what it is allocated to. So those are the three things that are, and who the advertiser is. So those are the 4 things that are germane to us in our
Who
decision.
maintains the scoreboard? So
it's ours.
the school district maintains it. So what
Mhm.
happens if something happens to the scoreboard and the sign has to come down? What happens to the
Yeah,
advertising?
who's liable for
Right,
fixing?
so now
fixing-
you're saying, it's a 5-year commitment.
Go back to many of these booster groups and notify them when there are troubles to see if they would help us, and 9 times out of 10 they do. That's the Concord.
Think Domingo, are
Benefit.
you're asking what happens if the scoreboard can no longer be and the advertiser, basically the advertising contract is forfeited,
Right,
right?
and-
Like, how do you reconcile things with the
Right,
advertiser?
because I mean,
That's
if you
yeah.
give them access to the scoreboard for
That's-
10 years
That's a whole nother-
and then something happens, now it's like, hey, we just put up this X amount of money and we have 3 years left on this contract.
Mhm.
If I'm correct, our agreement is with the booster organization and the booster organization has the agreement with the advertiser. And so all parties would talk to all parties.
Parties.
Yeah,
Is there something that they sign that takes the
Teamwork.
liability off of this group?
Yeah.
Or off the district? I mean,
That's tricky I'm not opposed to it, but I think I'm not gonna favor it yet either, because I don't want us to send messages to the booster clubs that are disincentives to them either. You know, how can we share these responsibilities in a way that doesn't impede our effort to do our main mission here as a school committee,
Right.
which is keep this place afloat properly.
Mhm.
So I think we could kick that around some more. It'd be nice to indemnify lots of people for lots of things, you know, indemnify us in lots of ways that we don't do right now.
But I think, I think the big takeaway is like, to make it like, you wouldn't want to approve something for 10 years because it's the time frame is
It's not realistic.
Well,
right.
we'll all be gone 10 years from now, right? After these committees. And I think this was part of the struggle, with this one. I mean, this predates every single person at this table, in 2015, none of us were on the committee. Lori wasn't here, Bob wasn't here, and so that's where we find ourselves.
And every school does it differently. Some
Yeah,
people say
sure.
absolutely
Sure.
none, or by
I'll take
exception,
everything,
or
right.
at the discretion of, or like,
Sure.
it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
so we're in our own waters here.
Yes, yes.
Are you comfortable if we didn't ask for what's the word here, for that level of protection?
No, I'm just throwing it out there just because, I don't think it's fair to the school to be used and only getting $900 a year for something that's up there 365 days a year. You have hundreds of people who sees it. We don't know what kind of revenue they're pulling in. And then on the back end of it, you have programs that are looking for funding and they're falling short, where we can actually increase that by saying, and putting it out to the greater public, saying, hey, look, we have space on our scoreboard and it's going to cost you $4,500 a year versus 5 years for $4,500, so it's just thinking of ways to bring in some revenue and also keep the students, they might want something up there themselves, but no one knows about it. This is the first time I've ever heard of school property being used as advertising space. We don't allow it in Boston.
Right.
If it's in a pamphlet, a handout, it's something different, but the actually school on the school grounds, it's like off limits.
Where it's
So,
got that permanency to
I think
it.
that's
Right.
to your
And as I hear what you're saying,
Exception.
I'm convinced, again, step one is to see that we follow our own policies, because it's going to lead to what you said, which is letting people know, advertisers know, and boosters, which will benefit them, that
Right.
this stuff has value. This stuff shouldn't be cheap. Because it's critical space that's being provided to them. And we're not a bargain,
Yeah.
right.
we shouldn't.
And I
be a
think
bargain.
too, like the intention is, and I'm speaking out of turn, I don't run a boosters organization, but I think the intention is to keep the community businesses involved. So it feels, not bigger than the community. And, to that I might counter, like $5,000 might be a lot of money to a small baseball organization,
business
a
versus,
local
yeah.
business. So I don't, once we say, oh, this has a tremendous amount of value, I mean, I don't think we're looking for Bank of America, for example, in this instance, because I think we grant exception because they are community partners, that there's some mutual benefit there.
Well,
I don't know, but
It's a digital board, and all of a sudden you're bringing in $10,000 a year because now it's multiple sponsors versus one.
I don't think any
You
of
get
these
what I
are
mean?
digital, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's just something down
Right,
the line
yeah.
that can be, put some money can be set aside through the boosters, where you can say, hey, well, you have one, how about we add 10? And these things are circulating, and we went from $900 to 10 grand, and you can actually generate a little bit more funding. So just food for thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess just, maybe we can discuss this a little bit more at policy and just have a little bit more discussion about that.
That's a good idea.
Because, are
On your
we
ambitious
deciding,
agenda.
are we deciding,
On your agenda.
who is the advertiser? And we're not in our policy. We're just approving the advertising. We're not
Well, no, but
weighing
yeah,
in completely on who the advertiser is.
I disagree.
yeah, but I think
Well,
we
that's what we
are.
need to,
Like,
Yeah,
we
we
are.
Yeah.
Like if
We need to
Amazon.
discuss
you know,
that. If
someone-
Amazon
yeah,
came
if someone
in-
ordered Amazon,
Right.
would we say yes,
Or we
right?
should-
Yeah.
Like what?
Or Fox News.
It's loose
Yeah.
enough that we can, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
right, okay.
Okay.
All right, so we will look forward to that again next week. We'll give you more information.
That was the longest 5 minutes.
I
I've
know,
ever-
it was really
I mean-
long 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, we're
we
catching up.
were really ambitious in trying to get it over in 5 minutes, but it's okay.
Okay.
I think we needed to have that discussion
we
and
did.
really just flesh it out.
That was
So,
painful.
okay, on to our second reading of policy, and I will turn this over to Carrie Rankin. Where's our policy chair?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have much community input or any, and we also didn't have any conversation last time beyond what we talked about in the subcommittee meeting. So I think the next step, I mean, if anybody has any final thoughts before we vote on these policies, otherwise, I think we just move forward to a vote when we get there.
Carrie, remind me, 100% of this is what you or I might call housekeeping. It's
Yes.
updating references and so
Yes.
on. There's nothing that, if I recall
And
correctly,
consolidating, like there's some consolidating of policies.
but to our knowledge, nothing that would impact the life of a student or a teacher or Lori sitting down with somebody to parse policy vis-a-vis a question she got.
I would defer to you on that, but
Yeah.
I don't think
I
so.
think we're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. All right, and now we're on to our action items. So the first is to vote to approve our school committee policies. And if anyone has the agenda up.
I do have it. How do I have to read just the
You can.
policy like letters or the full name?
This is our official record. Go for it,
Read the whole thing?
please. Sorry.
So it's okay. I move that the Concord and Concord Carlisle school committees vote to approve the following policies. AC, the non-discrimination, including harassment and retaliation. ACR, non-discrimination, including harassment and retaliation. ACAB, sexual harassment. JICK, harassment of students. ACA, policy prohibiting harassment, would be removing that policy. JBA, the student to student harassment, also to be removed. JIC, student discipline. JICA, student dress. GBA, equal opportunity employment. GCF, professional staff hiring. JB, equal educational opportunities. JFBB, school choice.
Second.
Any more discussion? Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. And then we move over to our vote on surplus vehicles, and we're gonna have our discussion and vote at the same time on this one. If you remember, this was on our agenda at our last meeting, and Bob and Lori went to another meeting, so we're bringing it back around. So I will turn it over to Bob and Lori.
I think we're.
Just
gonna
before
turn
we
over-
vote?
I think we need to make a
Bob?
motion.
Do we do motion
And then we
first
have
before discussion?
discussion.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Right.
So I move that we surplus. I don't,
I've got-
Okay, sorry.
got it
Do you have it
here.
in front of you?
oh, yeah.
You've
There's
got
a link.
page 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I move that the Concord and Concord Carlisle school committees vote to declare the items reported above as surplus to be dispositioned by whatever method is determined by administration to be in the district's best interest.
Second.
Okay, now we're gonna have some discussion. Bob?
What was the motion for which district? Is it,
To
Uh,
declare that the items are reported above as surplus.
This is a joint meeting, so they're.
Joint meeting.
this will be
Oh,
both.
It's
Okay.
regional.
The vote for both.
We're
Okay,
gonna have to
so,
vote separately
yeah.
for both.
Oh, okay.
okay, so I'll run through my report. Just wanted to clarify that you both districts will need to vote. In my report, I also shared an electric bus grant update, which just is for your information. I won't go through. You know that we didn't receive it, but if you want more information, it's there. I also I think there were some questions that folks had, so I've kind of outlined that here. We need to prioritize. So, in relation to what we're surplusing, these are all vehicles that are off the road. They can't be registered. And they're not eligible for if we were to get a grant, they're not eligible to be used to meet our taking a bus off the road requirement. And for that electric bus grant, if we did end up receiving buses and didn't have buses that were older than 2010, the rule is that we prioritize those, but not that we can't then move on to 2011 or later if we don't have any that are 2010 and older. So this does not cause us any problems with the EPA grant. These are taking up space in the lot and just need to, there's no use to them, residual value to us other than the scrap metal that we'll get from it. So the way I wrote it reflects that I wasn't certain at the time I wrote it whether we could directly scrap it. We need to sell them to the scrap metal dealer. So that's why I just would prefer to keep it written that way. What we're going to do is sell them to the scrap metal dealer. They'll scrap them. They'll determine what the value is based on the weight, and we'll receive the proceeds. Portion of the proceeds will go to the regional district as revenue, and then the portion that's the towns will send a check to the town, or we'll get the third party company that we use to send the check to town of Concord. And so that's it. I don't think that this has been, I don't know when the last time this was done, but I think John has been looking to get rid of these vehicles for a while. Yeah. So I don't know if there's
We
any.
had to stop needing them before they get scrapped.
Before we get scrapped. Any questions on that?
You've said this before, what is the typical life of a bus?
I mean, 10, it says 7 years, I think. I mean, I know that when we, I don't know what it is
You'll
here.
get 10, yeah.
And-
You get 10.
Yeah.
But there's, with the way the roads are treated, they get some significant wear and tear here. Depends on what mileage they get to. Some of them, the trip to Boston takes longer.
Yeah.
They put more mileage on. So it can vary. So, yeah, and I don't know, we don't have experience long-term with electric buses yet. I don't know what their useful life will be yet. But I have the roster too. You can see how old the
Yeah, I
buses
was
are
looking at
on
that.
there.
Yeah.
And we do have replacement factored in to our budget. So I can better answer that question with more time and more time here and more time with John. But hopefully that kind of addressed it for now.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, so I was remembering that when we typically vote, we would say aye for both when we were doing roll call votes. And this is why this is a little bit confusing. So let's do the region vote. I would do them separate. So we've made the motion. It's been seconded. So all in favor on the region?
Aye.
Okay,
So can we have the motion read again for Concord Public? Is that probably the cleanest way to do it?
the motion had both included.
I think we're
both
comfortable
included.
because of the.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do,
Just-
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so just for Concord.
So
All,
okay, so we
So
can
you're
just
gonna
call
call
you're
it,
gonna do it. for
Okay.
Concord.
I-
Sorry.
For the Concord vote.
regarding the motion, all in favor for Concord?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
What was the motion for the policies? Do we need to do that for policy? I thought we used to.
I know, I think that's what's getting confusing.
No, we have always done aye for both, I think.
Well, we can't,
Oh.
Because
Like-
some of them
No.
were regional.
we just said aye. I didn't say aye
Oh.
for both.
Yeah.
I know you did. but I didn't.
No,
I didn't say aye.
Policy manual
Well,
for
for both
all policies.
So we can vote as a
As a
joint school
region.
committee at the region,
That is.
because it is
Those are
one
really nice.
policy.
We don't have a
Okay.
joint, we have a regional school committee and a Concord. We don't have a joint, revenue joint meeting, right?
But we have a
Right.
Concord
Yeah.
Carlisle policy.
Policy.
You
manual.
vote for both.
But I didn't vote for, both. I just said aye. So I guess
Oh.
we'll just,
Okay.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so
Yeah, sure.
I mean, we could actually take roll call votes.
I don't know.
If we
don't
would
need
like,
to.
we don't
You guys
need to.
discuss
I
what
could
you
vote.
think.
We'll discuss amongst ourselves.
I don't know.
We're definitely
Well, I'll
not
ask.
gonna
If it's streamlined of
Okay.
calling it for the region,
Jim.
she'll call it for
Okay.
Concord. and-
Okay.
I think we're just not used to doing it
have a
because
better
of.
person.
That's what I'm
right?
saying. I can't remember.
Okay, I don't recall anything.
Yeah.
Okay, and just before we adjourn, just a bit of housekeeping on the coffees, the school committee coffees. There are 2 tomorrow. They are at the,
We got upgraded to the
got upgrade
Goodwin
to the
Forum
Goodwin
at the
Forum.
library.
It's gonna be quite large for our coffee, but a beautiful
Yeah,
space.
it's really nice.
And there is a coffee tomorrow at 11 and at 6:30. I have sent it to the bridge.
Oh, it's,
I-
yeah.
I don't think they've posted anything. I don't know that they post. Living Concord had posted it, the PAs posted it. Some of the PTGs have posted it, some of social, some don't. It was in your district bulletin. So if anyone in the public is listening, tomorrow at 11 and 6:30. Originally it was 7, but the library closed at 7:45. So we switched to 6:30 that you tweeted out also. So that's pretty live. And then who is able to go tomorrow at 11?
I'm doing.
That's
morning.
Court and
That's okay.
because
can't.
Carrie can't, so I'm
Okay,
taking
so
Carrie's
you
place.
two are going
Initially, she was the
tomorrow at
designated.
11. And can anyone join me tomorrow at 6:30?
I can, if I can.
Okay.
I was planning to, but
It's okay.
I'm stuck at a Pop Warner game.
We
That's
all
more
are
fun.
busy.
That's more fun. Okay, so if
I
you
need
can
to
come
just-
tomorrow,
Like 90%. Can I
Okay,
just confirm a
great.
couple logistics? and
90%, and then I'll start, making phone
Yeah.
calls the rest of you tomorrow morning to really see if you'd like to.
And
spend
I
your
did
evening
say
with me.
No, if
If
you.
no
go
one
alone, I
else,
would
yeah,
choose
you have Carlisle, exactly. And you did a coffee, so
Yeah,
thank you
you're
very
off the hook.
much.
How did that
Off
go?
the hook. Very nice.
It was 3 hours. It was long.
Ah,
Were there a
Yeah.
lot of people there?
8 or 9.
That's pretty
That's
That's a
good.
lot. That's
It's
real
good.
turnout. Yeah.
Great conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, very much regional oriented,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Thank goodness, but that's the only thing that.
You're in Carlisle, so you're good. Carlisle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
And then we do have, and just while we're on the topic of coffees, we have the one in Hyde Park. It's at the Hyde Park branch of the Boston Public Library. I believe that's what we're doing, and that is on November. I'm just looking at my calendar to get the date right, 19th at
Yeah.
10 a.m.
It's 12.
Who's going to that one?
I'll be there.
I will be there.
I
Okay.
can be there.
Okay.
What's the date again?
It is
The
November
19th.
19th,
At what time?
10 a.m.,
10 to noon.
10 to noon. Or, in Carla, it might be
Do
3
we
hours.
need
maybe
to-
1 hour. No, I'm just
Do
kidding.
we
10
need
to
to
noon.
do any provisioning? Or is it a BYO?
Well, that we
In the
didn't really
library,
discuss.
can
Can we bring it? in
Bring
the library?
food to the Goodwin Room. I don't
You
think so.
can, you can it, in the Hyde Park Library, you can,
I believe
yes.
so.
You
Yeah.
can.
We've done it.
We were gonna be in the basement. Where you
We've
can
been
bring
upgraded.
food, but they did upgrade. us.
You know what?
Yeah, no, so I don't think
I
we
don't think we
can.
actually can.
I don't think they'll
I'll
be
check
finishing
though.
tomorrow.
We'll look forward to doing something for us.
Yes, I'll check, tomorrow. I'll just email Elizabeth and see if we can.
I'm
bring
pretty
food.
sure that
Pretty
should-
you
it's a no.
can. Okay,
Yeah, I'm.
so we're
90.
having a coffee without coffee. but
And we
it's okay.
can,
Done that also.
Right.
It's like
Yeah,
proverbial
nobody
coffee.
cares, right?
we didn't advertise our Carlisle coffee in the Mosquito because the timing.
It was
of just
timing,
didn't- Yeah, but we should probably think about contacting the Mosquito about the one that's in Boston.
Yes,
Because
please.
last year
And also
we had
Lily,
someone
the
come
Lily
from
Hill.
Carlisle to
Yeah.
Boston.
Yes,
So
Sweet.
and I think
Yeah.
we invited
Are you
Millie
volunteering?
to the.
Pardon?
Are you volunteering
Saturday
to
one. I don't know if she can come or not.
I
but
can,
think
I
we
can,
invited
I
her.
can do that.
Yeah,
Hi, Sarah.
yes, Sarah's on with us, so maybe Sarah can put it right in there. Or
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
she'll email me. I'll email her if she doesn't get in touch with me. And I think that that's all we had. So at this point, I'd make a motion to adjourn
It's
the,
not 8:30.
it's not 8:30, but we started, this does say 8:30 and we started at
Right,
6.
We can
It
adjourn.
should have said
before, or
7:30.
no later.
It actually should have said 7:30.
Because we started early.
Yes, because we started early.
Workshop and like.
Yes, we
meeting.
did.
So
We did both. All right,
Motion to adjourn, anybody?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
all right.
Right.
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
See you.
Bob, thank you very much. Extras for you, sir.
Your bus